Chapter 2366. Then, what's the deal with the Tao Qi crown? Lu Xiaoyi continued to ask shamelessly. Qian Xiu said, the Tao Qi crown. It's like this. When the Tao was first established, no one had it. However, as everyone's understanding and recognition of the Tao steels increased, including their compatibility with the new era of the heavenly Tao, the Tao Qi crown slowly began to appear. It's very complicated to explain, Kuan Xiu snorted. Those who voluntarily withdrew were basically unable to attain the Tao Qi crown. Either their Tao was shallow, they did not receive recognition, or they simply stole the results of others. I'd like to know, which one do you belong to? By the way, up until now, there have been more than 10,000 Tao establishers in the surrounding space. Now, there are only 3,000. Where did the 7,000 go? Young man, don't be too impatient. You have to look carefully and think with your heart. Don't ask questions that you don't know when you've just arrived. Lu Xiaoyi nodded politely and asked a few more questions before taking his leave. Looking at his back, the perfected lords below were very curious. 2 grandmasters, what do you think of this young senior? Looking at his age, he might not even be as old as us, right? Qian Xiu smiled. He's very ordinary. There's no need to pay too much attention to him. However, the principle of yes is that no matter who he is, you have to achieve yes. Kuan Xiu smiled as well. He hides his strength like the carp of the Dragon Gate. However, the principle of no is that no matter who he is, you have to achieve no. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the surrounding space. More than 3,000 Tao steels were vivid in his eyes. It was not that he had good eyesight, but that every Tao steel had experienced hundreds of years of elimination. After the survival of the fittest, most of the Tao Qi crowns had begun to appear at the top of the Tao steels. The Tao Qi crowns were like the scores of the Tao steels. They could more accurately measure the strengths and weaknesses of the Tao steels. This included many things, including the recognition of the heavenly Tao, one's own foundation, the depth of one's understanding, the hearts of the people, the public's comments, and a series of comprehensive things. In the end, such a crowns were formed. It could roughly represent one's level among the many Tao steels. Perhaps the highest level of Huaguan might not necessarily succeed in establishing one's Tao, but the lower level of Huaguan would definitely not succeed. The ones with the highest Tao Qi were the 36 old Khanate great Taos. They still relied on their profound foundations, complete systems, and vast audiences to gain the approval of the majority of cultivators. This situation would not change until the arrival of a new era. After several hundred years, there are also some brand new great Tao tablets that showed their brilliance and tried their best to catch up. For example, Pure Yang, Blood River Life, Yellow Springs, Netherworld, Emptiness, Dreamland, Devour, Dual Cultivation. These were all brand new great Tao tablets that attacked the opposing Tao. As a new era approached, it was the opportunity for these new great Taos to catch up. In the end, the most representative part would succeed and be replaced. This was basically the process. There was still a long way to go, and more Tao tablets would be built. The true competition was still far from reaching its climax. Now was still the time for probing. As more and more cultivators arrived, when the number of cultivators reached a certain limit, it would truly reflect the trend of popularity. Lu Xiaoyi originally wanted to visit his friends here, but when he scanned with his divine sense, he realized that his friends were all very busy. They were busy dealing with countless insults in their own Tao tablets. Insults were both malicious and kind. Stupid people would fight back, and smart people would learn from it. In this place, there were not many stupid people. He could go to his friends' Tao tablets to find people, and it wouldn't take too much time. However, he preferred to let people find him. It was very easy to do this. He just needed to set up a Tao tablet that others would know was his. He had some guesses and plans about what he should do after coming to the land of the Yellow Dragon. He originally wanted to observe and learn, but when he really came here, he realized that there was no way he could learn. What he should learn, he had already learned. The foundation of more than 20 Khanate great Taos made him feel indifferent towards most of the Tao tablets here. With his thickness, they were shallow and childish. He could not learn from them, and observing them was purely a waste of time. He decided to establish his Tao directly. He had the qualifications to do so. Communicating with his divine sense and establishing a connection with the surrounding space was the first step. In fact, it was not a person who was controlling all of this. It was the great Tao arena set up by the immortal court here. It was the rules that controlled the surrounding space, the rules that had been projected by the immortal court for a long time. No buildings were allowed here. In the surrounding space, only things with the nature of great Tao could exist, such as Tao tablets. Lu Xiaoyi used his divine sense to communicate with the rules of the surrounding space. It was to transmit the great Tao concept that he planned to establish to the surrounding space. When the surrounding space recognized it, it would automatically form a Tao tablet, the most basic naked Tao tablet. Therefore, Tao tablets were not built by the cultivators according to their own intentions. You build an obelisk, I build an octagonal castle, he builds a still house. They were all of the same regulations. Things without culture and customs would be a simple and unadorned large Tao tablet inside. Of course, no one would care about the appearance. What was important was the content. The threshold was very low, and it did not exclude similarities. It opened the door wide and allowed you to open your Tao tablet as you wished. But if the Tao tablet you opened was always at the bottom of the line in the future comparison, your Tao aura would not be magnificent, and you would be attacked by groups of haters. You would be surrounded by contemptuous gazes. Then, you might not be able to persevere and lose your confidence. Unsurprisingly, Lu Xiaoyi's divine sense communication was passed through without hindrance. His Tao realm was molded into an ordinary Tao tablet shell by the surrounding space, waiting for him to fill it up. No one cared. In the land of the Yellow Dragon, new Tao tablets were erected from time to time, and there were also Tao tablets being removed from time to time. Cultivators advocated participation. Putting aside whether they had the ability to do so, it did not matter if they set up a Tao tablet. Even if it was removed very quickly, it did not matter. They just wanted a fresh feeling. When they talked about it with the younger generation in the future, they could boast shamelessly. I was also someone who had set up Tao tablets before the new era. Unfortunately, the heavens were unfair, and so on, of course, you had to be at least a half immortal to be qualified. As soon as the naked Tao tablet was erected, Lu Xiaoyi immediately felt a kind of call from the unseen world. He did not refuse and threw himself into it. Once he entered the Tao tablet, he felt like he was in a primordial world. It was a chaotic space, like a piece of white paper that could be freely drawn. This kind of feeling was actually quite similar to his experience of establishing the 10th realm in the Heaven's Volition Sword Tao tablet. It was not new, and he could do it with ease. He calmed his mind and relaxed his mind. He put everything he had learned in his life into it. This was not a place to hide. In front of the heavens, in front of the heavens, in front of the universe, if you still wanted to hold back, no one would approve of you. If such a person were to be compatible with the great Tao, he would only cultivate his trusted followers and eliminate those who did not agree with him. He would use the great Tao as a tool to expand his own legacy. The cornerstone of the great Tao should be selfless, honest, and indiscriminate in education. This was the true meaning of the Tao. It was not a candy that was hidden in one's pocket and would only be taken out by others when they bowed and bowed. There was no sluggishness. It was the essence of what he had learned in his life. Therefore, he was free to do as he pleased, and he did it to his heart's content in one go. In less than a day, the Tao tablet was completed. There was no real chapter, but as long as a cultivator outside scanned it with their divine senses, they would be able to feel that unparalleled sharpness. That was not a tablet. That was a sword. Chapter 2367. Who actually dared to establish Sword Tao here? Looking at the surrounding space, everyone used Tao to enter Tao, but no one used tools to enter Tao. Even those pill Tao, talisman Tao, array Tao, and tools Tao that had a long history, no matter what Tao it was, it still used the universal Tao as its foundation. It would not force you to concoct pills or create talismans. The core standard of the Great Tao was that no matter who you were, you had the right and possibility to learn this Great Tao. It had to have universal value, not something that only pill Tao cultivators could learn or talisman Tao cultivators could practice. If it could not be universal, they could not establish a Great Tao. Just like sword Tao, even if your sword techniques were heavenly, even if you could kill gods and immortals, if you could not learn other Tao orthodoxies outside of swordsmen, you would never be able to establish a Great Tao. Don't talk about Xiantian. Even Houtian would be difficult. Because of a sword, you limited yourself to a corner. How could something that was recognized by the entire universe's cultivation world only serve a few Tao orthodoxies? People who did this were either crazy or stupid. They viewed all the heroes in the world as nothing. They placed their own things above other people's arrogance. Just like how you like to eat chicken buttocks, you wanted to make chicken buttocks the main dish of a banquet without caring about other people's feelings. Should this kind of behavior be encouraged? If it was, then knife Tao, spear Tao, fist Tao, and so on could also be openly placed on the table for everyone's evaluation. If it was really so, then what could not be established in this world? Teapots could also be used, that was tea Tao. Chamber pots could also be used, every family could not do without them. This was a provocation to the order of the Great Tao. A wolf sneaked into a flock of sheep. What would you do? Curse him to death. Curse him to death. Immediately, half immortals rushed in, and there was more than one. In the 3,000 Tao tablets, they could be considered as a poisonous scorpion tail. But these people went in quickly and came out even faster. For the other Tao tablets, there was a process when outsiders went in to challenge the Tao realm. It was a mutual exchange, learning from each other's strengths and improving together. But for the Sword Tao tablet, what was strange was that the people who came out were not willing to exchange the details of the Sword Tao tablet with others. All of them were mysterious and unfathomable. What was the meaning of this? Was it disdain? Or was there something else? That Taoist looked ordinary and always had a smile on his face. He was actually a swordsman? Who is it? A few Tao perfected lords began to ask around. They were the most active group of people in the land of the Yellow Dragon. They did not feel pressured to establish their own Tao. Most of them came here to broaden their horizons or look for opportunities to break through. While looking for Tao tablets that interested them, they also made many perfected lord friends. But after asking around, they found nothing because their friends' seniors refused to say anything. What was the situation inside? Win or lose? Was it a gain or a loss? Half-immortal Qian Xiu lightly reprimanded. What are you muttering about? If you want to know, then go in and see for yourself. No one is stopping you. It was not the style of a cultivator to beat around the bush. Fine, I'll lead you in. Let's see what kind of person dares to offend the world here. But for the time being, it was not their turn. Although the Tao tablet did not restrict cultivators from entering, if you wanted to compete with the Tao master inside, and not just take a look, there was an upper limit. There was no situation where tens of thousands of people would rush in. There were many people who wanted to enter the Sword Tao tablet. Other than the swordsmen, most of them were dissatisfied, who only wanted to take a look. After waiting for several months, they finally saw an opportunity. A dozen or so cultivators, including perfected lords and half-immortals, entered the Sword Tao tablet together. They were all swords, densely packed swords, filled with endless killing intent. The dozen or so perfected lords could not endure for even a moment. After entering, they were killed by the sword intent. Not to mention Tao realm cultivators, they did not even see a single Tao hair. The two half-immortal seniors were slightly better, but not much better. It was just a difference in time. Very embarrassing. No wonder everyone was so wary of it. How could they say it? How could they say they were kicked out the moment they entered? But they finally knew whose sword Tao steel it was, and who the smiling young Taoist was. Escort Liu. Escort Liu, the rumored most outstanding swordsman in the universe. He killed nearly 100 half-immortals. He even killed an immortal Peng. For such a person to dare to set up a Sword Tao tablet here, it did not seem surprising. It would be abnormal if he did not do so. This was not a normal person. For such a person to lose to him, it did not seem to be embarrassing. But the key question was, what kind of Tao was this? Martial ancestor. This is the sword Tao. Why do we feel that it is strange? Moreover, is there any meaning in setting up a Tao tablet for something that is so biased? If it is like this, can every cultivator who is biased do the same? Those who are good at fighting will compete in fighting? Those who are good at refining pills will compete in refining pills? Those who are good at drawing talismans will compete in drawing talismans? Half-immortal Kuan Xiao explained to them, "You came out too quickly, so you might not feel it deeply. This is no longer a pure sword Tao, but a spirit of struggle. The Tao is a struggle. Until death, there will be no regrets. The Tao is unique, there is no one else. The Tao is dangerous, and you will press forward. The sword is just a medium, it is not important. What is important is the unbending spirit. It is indeed a kind of Tao realm, because this is the spirit that all cultivators of our generation should have. If you have this kind of spirit, you can also set up a Tao tablet of spear, Tao tablet of saber, any Tao tablet." The true monarch somewhat understood, but there were still some who were unconvinced. In terms of spirit, we also have it. For the Tao, we will die for the Tao. Then why are we not afraid of death? But after going in, we are still instantly ejected. With the same spirit, is there a difference in level? Kuan Xiao sighed. There is no difference in spirit. In a sense, there is no difference between mortals with outstanding spirit and cultivators. But what I want to tell you is that the spirit of struggle is not something that can be said with words. It was tempered through experience, through life and death, through choice, and through countless events. You all have some understanding of Escort Lu's life. Then let me ask you, what he has done, who has done it? Not to mention that those legends are only the tip of the iceberg. There is no difference in spirit, but there is a difference in tenacity. It is the same kind of spirit, but your new branches, he is an old vine, soaked in tung oil. In comparison, there is no point in comparing. So I want to say, for Escort Lu to be able to reach this step today, there is not the slightest bit of luck. The heavenly Tao rewards the diligent, rewards the brave, rewards the fight. It is not rewarding the lazy and muddling through. You all feel that you have already worked very hard? That depends on who you are comparing with. Seeing the hesitant eyes of the disciples, he knew that it was not good to ask what they wanted to ask. So he took the initiative to answer. We can't do it either. This person's spirit is already condensed to the point of substance, as if it is immortal, without a single flaw. If we must name it, I can't find a suitable name. It would be better to call it the Sword Tao. But you all have to understand, this is the spirit of the sword, not the object. Chapter 2368. Lu Xiaoyi established the way of the sword, but not the way of the sword, because he was very clear that it was impossible to establish the way of the sword through pure swordsmanship, and he did not pursue this. What he wanted to express here was a kind of spirit, the spirit of the sword. Why was he doing this? It was not a new way that he had truly worked hard on. There were many considerations in this. First, he had to make himself stand out in the Yellow Dragon's land. This was his established strategy. High profile, unrestrained. Only this way could he attract more attention. Actually, it was also a kind of self-promotion. He was very famous, but he was far from being known by everyone. He needed a way to attract people's attention in an instant. The aroma of wine did not fear the depth of the alley. This saying was not wrong, but the premise was that you had to have enough time to let the aroma of the wine spread throughout the city. He did not have that kind of time now. In fact, no one had too much time. The new era was just ahead in 1,000 or 2,000 years. It would not wait for the aroma of the wine to spread before descending. Therefore, he had to tell everyone that he, Escort Lu, had come and had established such an unrestrained way. When people came here to scold him, they would then realize, Escort Lu had not only established a way, but also other links such as stars balance, self-packaging, publicity. He was also very good at it. Secondly, he had to create a false impression for some people. He was still that arrogant and unrestrained swordsman who wanted to poke a hole in the sky if he was not careful. He was very clear. He must have been in the eyes of some people and had never left. In that case, how could a person like him settle the matter peacefully by establishing a new Tao? Escort Liu had stirred up shit all his life. There was no reason for him to come to the biggest shithole and turn over a new leaf. The Swordway tablet was set up to satisfy the eyes of these people. It was flashy enough, awe-inspiring enough, unrestrained enough. It was unrestrained enough. He knew the severity of the matter. In the eyes of the real big shots, his murderous and savage temper was not difficult to deal with. Li Wuya was an example. Perhaps it was because of his personality that the big shots felt that they could give him a way to show the justice of the heavenly Tao. Because what he was showing now was only fighting, killing, being unreasonable but not subverting. The worry of an ant was not worth mentioning. This was the way the big shots thought. They were never afraid of the bravery of those ignorant people. The Sword Tao tablet was the best cover for him to display his bravery. From the looks of it, it was very successful. This was because the Tao energy of the Sword Tao steel was rising rapidly like a bubble. In less than a year, it had already surpassed most of the Tao steels. Within the surrounding space, the Tao steels related to the 36 pre-celestial great Taos were the most magnificent. Because of their millions of years of foundation and connections, all of them were over 1 million feet tall, and this was under the condition that the number of cultivators who came was limited. Among the new great Taos, the more outstanding ones were mostly above 100,000 feet and below 300,000 feet. There was a lot of potential, but now it was just potential. Most of the ordinary Tao tablets were 100,000 feet tall, and some were even less than 10,000 feet tall. They sounded very tall, but when placed in the background of the universe, they couldn't be seen from far away. Liu Xiaoyi's Sword Tao steel had been established for less than a year, but the Tao Qi canopy was already close to 100,000 feet. This was because the time was too short and many cultivators had not gone in to experience it. The potential was promising. This was a bit beyond his expectations, but when he thought about it carefully, it seemed to be normal. This was the mechanism by which cultivators liked and disliked the Tao steels. To a cultivator, one's heart could not be faked. They clearly approved of it, but disliked it. They clearly opposed it, but disliked it. In the world of cultivation, this did not work. This was because to a cultivator, going against the will of their heart meant that they were not loyal to the Tao. How could they have a future? Packaging, embellishment, hype, propaganda, and so on. These things might match up with some of his memories, but there was one good thing about the world of cultivation. There was no internet water army here, and there was no voting against one's heart. This was because you voted with your heart. Because you were a cultivator, you could be fake in any aspect, but you could not be fake in the great Tao. This was the reason why Liu Xiaoyi's Sword Tao steel was so arrogant. Perhaps many people did not like him. Perhaps many people were thinking of ways to undermine him. But there was one thing. As a cultivator, his spirit was recognized. It resonated. The spirit of drawing the sword. This was also the common cry of almost all the lower realm cultivators. They needed a real channel to ascend. A channel where they could rely on hard work and talent to change themselves. Not all of this was controlled by those big powers and large corporations, becoming the playthings of the upper echelons. Occasionally, when they were happy, they would throw a piece of meat down, causing countless people to go crazy. Especially before the arrival of the new era, everyone knew that this was their only chance to change the world, to change the order, their last chance. If they missed this chance, they would see it again in the next era thousands of years later. This was the reason why they were willing to support such a Sword Tao steel, even if they were dissatisfied with it. Because they needed this kind of spirit of drawing the sword. Cultivators at the level of half-immortals and true monarchs had long passed the stage of being emotional. They knew what was important and what was the most important thing right now. It was the time to work together and push forward. Liu Xiaoyi accurately grasped this opportunity. Therefore, his sword Dao steel had never been empty since it was opened. There were always cultivators squeezing in just to express their feelings. Half immortals squeezed in because their opportunity was right in front of them. They needed this kind of change. True monarchs squeezed in because this was the only place where they could exert their strength. If this kind of spirit became a great Tao, their upper realm space would be opened after the new era. They would face a future full of infinite possibilities. Every man for himself, and the heavens take the hindmost. No one could resist this kind of temptation. The sword Dao steel became the place where every cultivator who came to the Yellow Dragon Land had to check in. Every travel-worn cultivator who came here would be warned. You don't have to look at the other Dao steels here, but you must look at the sword Dao steel and feel the spirit of fighting against the heavens. Following this, a wave of commotion rose. Just like when there were night watchmen, there would definitely be scholars and storytellers with the sword Dao steel, just like what the sharp-tongued cultivator said. The Dao of saber, Dao of spear, Dao of axe, Dao of cross, Dao of fist, and Dao of fist all appeared. They were like bamboo shoots after the rain, overflowing and becoming a disaster. However, if these followers wanted to reach the height of the sword Dao steel, it would be harder than ascending to the heavens. The gap was obvious because personal experience could not be replicated. Everyone had the spirit of fighting against the sword, but how far this spirit could persist was something that could not be learned. Want to learn? Kill 100 half-immortals. For the majority of cultivators, this was also an obvious matter. The so-called resistance. You had to have this kind of experience and strength as the foundation. Choosing a weak chicken to be the leader of the spirit of fighting against the sword was an irresponsible act towards this kind of spirit. On this point, no one could compare to Escort Liu. If you're not convinced, then challenge him. Chapter 2369. Liu Xiaoyi was a little annoyed now, because he originally wanted to release a smokescreen, but he didn't expect to release a big satellite. He didn't expect that his Sword Dao tablet would be so popular, because he still underestimated the desire of this world's cultivators to reach the upper realm. This kind of feeling had always existed, but it was suppressed by the pressure from above. After millions of years, it was finally time to release it, and the result could be imagined. Blazing, without hesitation. It had nothing to do with the sword anymore. He was a little worried that this kind of situation would backfire and really make him the center of attention, attracting some attention that he had been avoiding all along. It was difficult to stop halfway. He had become the representative of the sword spirit. He couldn't shrink back, right? How could he survive in the cultivation world in the future? At this point, he could only bite the bullet and move forward. He decided not to restrain himself, but to be even more arrogant. The Sword Dao tablet's Dao Qi canopy was not the highest, but the growth rate was the fastest. Under the combined efforts of the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, the price of the immortal star rose steadily. It rose to the point where people were elated, but it rose to the point where people were on tenterhooks. It rose to the point that the other Dao of saber, Dao of spear, and Dao of fist had to close. They couldn't compete, and if they continued to compete, they would only lose face and make a fool of themselves. On this day, 3 guests came to the Sword Dao tablet, and the 5 rings group of 4 gathered again. Before this, he also received many friends. In fact, the reason why the Yellow Dragon Land had the current situation, everyone supported the Sword Dao tablet and thought that it was the spiritual model of cultivators, was also inseparable from the support of these friends. In terms of connections, he definitely didn't have 10% of the cultivation world, but among the half-immortals of the inner and outer scenic sky, no one had more connections than him. The universe was too big, and when they really gathered together, it was very difficult to have a relatively unified organization. Dispersion was the biggest characteristic of the cultivation world. Suitable Dao intent, sparing no effort to promote the crowd, the right time, the heart of the people. These were the key to the Sword Dao tablet's success today. From the moment he established his Dao, the circle that he worked hard for 3,000 years began to quietly exert its power. Shishi was very emotional. Little E, you pretended to be in the cave. You still have the mood to joke inside, but you made us worry outside. Why didn't you come out after it ended? Did you know that we were going to trouble you? Looking at the three unfriendly gazes, Lu Xiaoyi begged for mercy. No, no. Initially, I wanted to come out and celebrate with everyone, but firstly, I have to make sure that the cave image won't change again. Safety first, and secondly, I have to know what's going on at the other end of the black hole, right? Qing Xian nodded. That's more like it. Then, was there someone playing tricks on the other side? There's no need for the Dao Steel to be stationed here. You can come and go as you please. While the struggle for the Dao isn't intense yet, we still have time to clean up the mess for the fifth ring. Yin Chun said in an evil tone, Little E, don't tell me you're done. Lu Xiaoyi laughed and told him the story of the West Ocean. That's about it. I can't say that the hidden dangers have been completely eliminated, but there shouldn't be any changes before the end of the era. Qing Xian nodded. Yes, but we can't let our guard down. There are also Taoists in West Elephant Heaven. Later, I'll have to trouble them to pay more attention to the West Ocean. Also, the West Ocean is far away and beyond the reach of the Five Rings. It's more convenient for people like us to come and go. Everyone, be careful. If you occasionally go out to travel, make a trip to the West Ocean and just treat it as a sightseeing. The few of them decided on how to deal with the Five Rings in a few words. This was decided by their current status. The once young and inexperienced cultivators had now unknowingly grown into the pillars of the Five Rings. Yenshin was very curious. Little E, your Sword Dao tablet is a little strange. Why isn't it the stars and balance you mentioned? Could it be that you were lying to us before? Are you afraid that we'll steal your sword spirit? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Why would I be afraid? This Sword Dao tablet was something I prepared to use on a whim. You all know that I'm being watched very closely and can't be too free, so I thought of using it as a smokescreen. Which swordsman hasn't thought of something like this? In the end, I didn't think that this thing would actually succeed. I'm very depressed now. Should I give up on this Sword Dao tablet? I originally wanted to use this as a cover to establish the stars and balance, but now it seems that if I give up on this Sword Dao tablet, I'm afraid no one will agree. It might even affect my true Dao. Yenshin was very serious. Little E, you can't give up? Since you've already started, the spirit will last forever. No matter what you originally thought, it's no longer important. What's important now is that the Sword Dao spirit has become the spiritual pillar of the lower realm cultivators. If you give up, everything you've done before will be in vain. Qing Xian was also very serious. It's not important whether you can use this to establish your Dao. It will be too affected by the external environment. But the meaning of the Sword Dao is that even if there's no hope, you have to persevere until the end of the era. The true formation of the so-called Great Tao required a long period of time to deduce, perfect, and eliminate the false to retain the true. It shouldn't have a time limit, and it must be completed within a certain period of time. Instead, it should be polished slowly, passed down through generations of relays, and finally achieve the Tao. However, the current situation was more rushed. It had to be decided in the new era, or else the new world would have no laws to rely on. To put it simply, the heavenly axioms' order was more urgent. Their great Taos were rushed out. Their predecessors had to spend millions of years of research to come up with a great Tao. They, on the other hand, came up with their own great Tao in a few thousand years, or even less. In fact, many of them were untested and unpolished by time. Therefore, seeing more, hearing more, and thinking more was a truly responsible attitude. Of course, coming up with it in advance to accept the judgment of the public was also a kind of attitude. Each had their own way, and it was hard to say which method was more suitable. However, the few of them had the character of true gold fears no fire. If they came up with it earlier, they would not be afraid of others picking on them and pointing fingers at them. They had enough confidence that they could perfect themselves amidst the doubts of others. Qing Xian snorted, but it will be soon. It won't be long if we drag it out. Erecting a monument in 1,000 years should be the shortest requirement. If it's any shorter, it will seem too rushed. How can a great Tao be easily perfected in a few hundred years? In these few hundred years, those who should come will come, and those who don't will give up. That's about it. Those who are hesitating and looking left and right are actually not confident. To use an idiom to describe them, they are overcautious and indecisive. Little E, according to the itinerary you mentioned just now, it doesn't seem right, does it? There are still hundreds of years in between. If you didn't come to the land of the Yellow Dragon to erect a monument, where did you go? Smoky Puppet felt that his time was not quite right. He had lost hundreds of years in between. Lu Xiaoyi laughed foolishly. Senior sister is really a meticulous person. You can't even let go of such a small matter. Actually, you didn't do much. Well, if I use an idiom to describe your speech, it would be to remove the crudeness and extract the essence. Smoky Puppet was still a little confused, but beside her, she laughed. Senior sister, what he did is no different from what Ma Lu did in the Fifth Ring. Under Smoky Puppet's angry gaze, the few Fifth Ring elites had a detailed discussion about the overall situation in the land of the Yellow Dragon. In fact, among the hundreds of thousands of people watching outside, there were also their own people, including some exterior heavenly half-immortals who had no hope of establishing Tao, some supremes who had ideas, and many allies of the Fifth Ring in Eastern Elephant Heavens. A simple calculation was that among the hundreds of thousands of cultivators, Eastern Elephant Heavens accounted for 20 to 30%. Among these 30 to 30,000 people, there were at least a few thousand who could make connections. This was the embryonic form of the Internet Water Army. Of course, they could not control the development of others. The most they could do was to set the pace, such as the so-called spirit of the drawing sword. After a round of discussion, Shishi was very satisfied. For the first time, there is no difference in our gathering, no trouble, no trouble. We can still gather here for a long time, so let's gather once every 50 years. If there is something special, we'll talk about it again. The improvement of the Tao state was a long process. It was not a flash of inspiration. There was a concept, a direction, and a general idea. It required one to be extremely meticulous in the details. It was so trivial that it was almost abnormal. What's more, one had to constantly correct the opinions of others. It was very time-consuming to get rid of the false and retain the true, and get rid of the crudeness. If nothing major happened, they would not leave this place from now on. Traveling the universe was no longer a necessity for them. The establishment of Tao was the most important thing. No one would mess with this priority. There were too many things to do, including the cooperation between each other, including the time to establish the second Tao tablet. Not only Lu Xiaoyi, but the other three also had their own second Tao. Qing Xian was yin and yang. Shishi was time, and Smoky Puppet was cause and effect. Their second Tao choices were surprisingly consistent, which was the old innate Tao. There was a very profound mystery in it. One thing that had to be understood was that cultivators who chose the old Xiantian Tao were not necessarily conservative. Similarly, those who innovated their own Tao were not necessarily reformists. In the cultivation world, black and white had never been clearly distinguished. Most of the time, there was confusion. Lu Xiaoyi coughed dryly. Well, I have something special. I don't know if I should say it. Chapter 2371. When Qing Xian and the other two heard this, they immediately turned and left. They had just praised him for not courting death for a while, but they did not expect this guy to be a dog that could not change its habit. He had not stopped all this time. There was one thing that the three of them found very strange. Why was this guy so good at causing trouble? It was as if he had a ring of *T around him, and green flies were always buzzing around him. Lu Xiaoyi also knew that he had angered everyone. He hurriedly bowed, and with great difficulty, stopped his three disgusted friends. Look, is there a need for this? We're all friends. and now you're running away faster than a rabbit when you're in trouble. You don't even ask? You should at least show some concern, right? Qing Xian glared at him. Actually, he was not angry, because his temper had long been worn out after more than 2,000 years of interaction. To know such a person, you can't even accurately say whether you're lucky or not. Say it. I knew it would be like this. You, *T stick Lu, have even upgraded your courting of death. You're not doing it alone, but dragging your family down? Say it. If it's really too big, I think we don't need to set up any Dao tablets, because sooner or later, we'll fall because of your courting of death. Shishi gnashed his teeth. As pure as I am, I actually believe that you can turn over a new leaf. Yin Chung snorted. If it has anything to do with you getting rid of the crude and taking the essence, don't blame me for not serving you well. Lu Xiaoyi's face was calm. How can that be? It's all business, and it concerns thousands of lives. Oh no, it's a matter of billions of lives. I know that you heroes are noble, sacrificing yourself for others, putting others before yourself, sacrificing yourself for righteousness. Yin Chung pretended to leave. Don't waste your breath. I knew that trouble would not be small when you said those sour words in the beginning. Be straightforward. If you don't say it, we're leaving. Lu Xiaoyi was mysterious. Everyone, listen up. I have a problem, and it might be a little troublesome. But from another perspective, it's a big opportunity for all of you. With this opportunity, I dare not say that establishing Dao will definitely succeed, but it will definitely increase the success rate by a few %. Only we have a good relationship. If it were anyone else, I wouldn't even bother telling them. Qing Xian frowned. Hurry up. I only understood one sentence. Trouble. Shishi also said, how much more? Was there such a thing in this world? If there really was one, would it be your turn? Taoists and Buddhists have long been beaten to a pulp. Faced with Smokey's murderous gaze, Lu Xiaoyi no longer kept him in suspense. It's like this. I made a trip to the Heaven's Choice continent, and I went to the Sword Dao Steel and exchanged a few blows with my ancestor. In the end, I found a path to the heavens after listening to Lu Xiaoyi's lies. The Fifth Ring Trio were all dumbfounded. Tearing down the Heaven's Choice continent, he really dared to think about it. When a cultivator reached the level of half immortal, it was already possible for them to destroy planets and regions. However, the planets and regions mentioned here referred to small planets and small realms within a certain range. There was a limit, judging from the current situation of the universe. Even if it was the smallest human domain, like Qingqiu Jr. 3 stars, a half-immortal wouldn't be able to destroy it in one strike. Only some large meteorites and asteroids could barely achieve the ability to collapse. Therefore, when facing the Heaven's Choice continent, which was the true #1 realm in the universe, using them as an ant try to shake a tree was overestimating them. That was simply wishful thinking. If they couldn't even break through the Earth's crust with a full-force attack, how could they break it apart? Shishi waved his hand in front of Lu Xiaoyi. How many is this? Lu Xiaoyi was very serious. 2. Shishi was speechless. Boss, you're number 2. Not bad. I thought I was your boss. However, Qing Xian wasn't in the mood to joke. He had always been serious and calm. His thinking was meticulous. From the results, if we succeed, our chances of establishing Dao will increase by more than a few %. Because we are cleaning up the mess for the heavenly Dao, it is a great act of benevolence. The legacy is endless. Therefore, what little E said is actually right. This is a great opportunity, but what I'm curious about is, do you think we can do it? Not to mention the 4 of us, even if 4 golden immortals came, they might not be able to do it. What do you think? Drawing such an unattainable pie? If we can't do it, won't it mess up everyone's Dao heart? We have such a great opportunity, but we can't grasp it. Or do you have a way? The 3 of them looked at him with burning eyes. They were all daring people. Jokes aside, it would be a lie to say that they weren't tempted by the matter of the Heaven's Choice continent after careful consideration. However, they wouldn't let their desires get to their heads. They knew very well that this shitstick Lu was still somewhat reliable. He would never be completely unconfident in courting death. This guy's final sorry state was actually all an act. Lu Xiaoyi never hid anything from his friends. This is a bigger matter. My opinion is that if we only rely on the four of us, it is absolutely impossible. This matter relies on the tactic of numbers, the collective effort. Since there is such an occasion, why don't we make use of it? Qing Xin knew what he meant. They had been working together for too long and understood each other very well. Once they stuck out there, but they knew what they were going to do. You mean we should lead this matter? In the name of benefiting the common people, establishing Tao, and accumulating luck, we can fool everyone? Feasible. Who wouldn't be willing to do something that could increase the success rate of establishing Tao? As long as a part of it goes, the rest must follow. Because if you don't follow, it means that you have less success factor than others. In the end, no one is willing to be left out of this great good deed. We also don't have to worry about people doing bad things, because this matter concerns our own future Tao. No one dares to not do their best. However, this isn't enough. Even if millions of cultivators gather in the land of the Yellow Dragon in the future, can we split the Heaven's Choice continent if we all go together? I don't think so. She also took it seriously. There are many practical difficulties. There are more than 100 billion people in the Heaven's Choice continent. If we force it, there will be countless deaths and injuries. Then we will lose our original intention. We might as well leave it to the future Heaven's will. If we want to do it, we must do it well. We must do it so that everyone understands that the result of us splitting up will be much smaller than the future Heaven's Choice continent splitting up. This is the foundation of great good. Otherwise, it will become great evil. Yinshan also said, "Little E, hurry up. Do you think I don't know you? You must have a rough idea of what to do. You are here to ask us to help you." Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. These friends of his were really cunning. He really couldn't hide anything from them. I will set the time of splitting up after the Tao of space shatters. Qing Xian's eyes lit up. Good idea. Once the space shatters, the geological structure of the Heaven's Choice continent will be clearly revealed. Because it was originally formed by many celestial bodies glued together. When a space shatters, the boundaries of those celestial bodies will be exposed. We only need to accurately record the boundaries of the space at that time, and then follow these unreliable cracks to make a fuss. It will be twice the result with half the effort, and we don't have to worry about shaking the Heaven's Choice continent. Chapter 2372. There was no need to talk about the details now. Firstly, there was still time. Secondly, they couldn't casually make a plan without a field survey. That wasn't the attitude of a cultivator. Based on the current order of the collapse of the innate Daos, the collapse of the remaining 16 Daos was traceable. What was certain was that time and space would be the last few. In other words, this matter would be done before the new era, just right to give bonus points to the cultivators. After a long time, who knew if the heavenly Tao would become muddle-headed? Kindness is easy to forget. Hatred is mellow with time. They had to prevent the heavenly Tao from falling into the same old habits as humans. If everyone got bonus points, didn't that mean no one would get bonus points? Of course, there was a difference. It depended on how much effort each person put in. But there was one point. When it came to effort, who could compare to the few of them? Just like when a dynasty changed, there were many people who put in effort. In the end, wouldn't the ones who benefited be the leaders? If Lu Xiaoyi sat firmly on the throne, they would all be kings on par with each other. The benefits were huge. According to the usual practice, since Lu Xiaoyi proposed the goal of courting death, the details would naturally be completed by the military advisor Qing Xian. We can't be an armchair strategist. The three of us have already established our Daos for some time. This place is considered stable. Let's first go to the Heaven's Choice continent to investigate and get first-hand information. Then, we can consider the specific implementation process. There are too many details here that need to be perfected. Just gathering a large number of people to the Heaven's Choice continent is a big problem. We can't possibly let everyone fly over, right? Most of them won't be able to fly over in their lifetime. Qing Xian looked at Lu Xiaoyi. We'll go there to observe. You can set up your Dao tablet here. Anyway, You'll only cause trouble if you go over. Why don't you stay here and cultivate? You can't be careless with your sword Dao tablet. If you give up halfway, even the Heaven's Choice continent won't be able to save you. Shishi said faintly, Ma Lu, how do you know that he won't cause trouble if he stays here? Lu Xiaoyi chuckled and guaranteed. Can't I just write a letter of guarantee? I guarantee that I'll be honest and guard the yellow dragon. I won't run around randomly. Before we have any progress on the Heaven's Choice continent, we won't cause any trouble. Qing Xian said in disdain. That's bullshit. If you're looking for trouble, that's for sure. What we're trying to say is, if you're looking for trouble again, deal with it yourself. Don't drag everyone down with you. The three of us aren't enough. The heavenly selection is too great, and it's not something that can be completed by just a few people. Should we pull another close friends? Qing Xian shook her head. No hurry. There is still plenty of time. Moreover, senior sister, you must be mentally prepared. The trouble that this fellow has caused for everyone isn't something that can be solved with just a trip to Heaven's Choice continent. Who knows, we might have to run between Yellow Dragon and Heaven's Choice in the future. This is the first time the three of us are exploring this place, so we need to have a good foundation first. Next time, we'll pull in our good friends of the interior realm. We can't take all the good stuff for ourselves. Qing Xian Shishi was rational, but Yin Cheng was more emotional. He pulled Yin Cheng aside and stared at him. Little E, it's not like you to put in so much effort. Tell me, are you not optimistic about our Tao? Or do you want to do it yourself? Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. He still couldn't hide his thoughts from his senior sister, who looked carefree on the outside, but was very careful on the inside. Senior sister, look at how much effort I've put in, but it actually didn't attract anything. Even if the Sword Dao tablet caused such a big commotion, no one seemed to care. Senior sister is actually very clear about the reason. The key is those few subversive great Daos, including senior sister's reincarnation. I don't know how they'll stop you. If no one stops you, of course I hope that senior sister can use it to establish your Tao. But if there's any accident, I'll take over. In front of those conservative forces, we're still very weak, so we have to leave a way out. Senior sister, I want you to promise me that if there's no other way, don't force yourself and change it to karma. Leave the rest to me. Yinxing looked at him as if she was looking at the high-spirited Li Wuya from 20,000 years ago. He was also so confident and fearless, as if it didn't matter even if the sky fell down. You're so sure that your new reincarnation is more profound than mine, and at the last moment, you don't need to polish, adjust, or improve, and you don't need the advice of many cultivators to get the approval of the heavenly Tao. Lu Xiaoyi was very serious. Yes, I'm sure. Not only your reincarnation, but also Qing Xian's heavenly punishment. I can't tolerate failure because we have no chance to remedy it. So I'm prepared to take over the three subversive great Daos at the critical moment. Yin Cheng took a deep breath. Good. I understand what you mean. Before you reveal your trump card at the last moment, you need us to cover for you. But let me tell you, if there's no accident, I won't let you. Lu Xiaoyi smiled brightly. Little E doesn't dare to snatch senior sister's things. I'll get beaten up. I just don't want senior sister to force it. The new era is coming. Everyone who survives has the right to enjoy the new cultivation system. I hope that when the time comes, there will be no less people around me. Otherwise, even if I achieve my goal, what's the point? I'm not really doing it for the common people. I'm just doing it for my family and friends. He wasn't worried about Qing Xian because that guy had always been calm. When it was time to give up, he would definitely give up. He wouldn't let his emotions affect his decisions. Moreover, the heavenly punishment was forced on him by the universe's Three Qing alliance. He was only worried about senior sister's stubborn temper. He was worried that she would use the swordsman's method of killing people on the great Tao. That wasn't a good thing. Just as he said, after the new era, he hoped that everyone would be neat and tidy. Yin Cheng reached out and patted his head. Little E, you're too tired. You're thinking too much. Actually, can a human consider everything in the cultivation world? You'll lose yourself like this. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. Senior sister, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. I also know who I am. I'm never forgotten. The Five Rings group of four said their goodbyes in the sword Dao steel. The three of them left separately. They each used their own methods and quietly left their Dao steels, leaving the land of the Yellow Dragon. This was also a very humane thing about setting up a Dao steel. There was no need to guard the steel, and one could come and go as one pleased. However, if the steel erector wasn't around for too long, he would lose control of his own Dao steel and lose the time to adjust his own great Dao. For some Dao steels that didn't have a solid foundation, this was very fatal. However, the foundation of their Dao steels was still relatively solid. With their foundation and strength, even without a freak like Lu Xiaoyi, they were still outstanding existences. They were also one of the most popular Dao erectors. There were some things that needed people to do. Establishing Dao was a systematic project. There were things within the Great Dao, and there were also things outside the Great Dao. Things outside the Great Dao, such as packaging and rendering, were only basic methods. They were too shallow, and everyone was using them. Only the Heaven's Choice continent was a way for a few people to truly distance themselves from others. Lu Xiaoyi didn't exaggerate when he said that this was a great opportunity. Chapter 2373. Above the Immortal Court, the 35th Jade, Clear Realm, Qingwei Heaven. This was a heavenly layer that only golden immortals could stay in, but at this time, Qingwei Heaven was not as prosperous as before. The scene of more than 30 Khanate great Daos gathered together was no longer there. Only a dozen or so great Daos guarding here alone. There was no trace of Qingwei Heaven. The golden immortals were not here. Only the true meaning of the Khanate Great Dao was left here. The consciousness of the Dao realm was like a huge cloud, colliding and merging with each other, giving birth to countless specious things, disappearing and reappearing at this realm. Were the ones left here human or Dao realm? It was no longer important. To golden immortals, they had countless ways of existing, and they could no longer be measured by human methods. But the consciousness was here, and they were here. Among the 36 great Daos, 5 of them had the Dao realm of Zenith Heaven. But now, 2 of them were gone, and the fate of morality had long descended, leaving only 3 to rule everything here, the order of the entire cultivation world. The remaining 3 were the 5 elements, time and karma. Many great Daos had descended, and the reason was thought-provoking. To the 36 consciousnesses that had ruled this universe for nearly 10 million years, it was very difficult to accept that some of them were going to withdraw from the stage of cultivation history. No matter what, once it was maintained for a long time, it would become a matter of course. But this was the trend, and it was irreversible. The fate of morality had already taken a step, and some of them would follow in its footsteps. It was not appropriate to call them conservative. Even perfected Lord Yuanying could see the trend, so there was no reason that golden immortals could not see it. Their conservatism was not that they did not accept changes, but they hoped that such changes would not affect the overall structure of the Khanate Great Dao. Part of it could be changed, but the key core could not be changed, and this was what they had to guard against. Everyone said that immortals were good, and they could do anything with a single thought. This was not the truth. The truth was that there were things in this world that they could not control. It was not a matter of ability, but even if you had the ability to do it, you could not do it with great fanfare and bare your arms. Because they had already turned into Dao, the Dao was them, and they were also Dao. They had broken away from the norm of humans. Even if they could also have a human body, the great Dao itself was the strictest control of golden immortals. If you merged with the Dao, you had to abide by it. If you did not abide by the human nature, you would break away from Dao. The great Dao is also a shackle. Just like a captain steering a ship, you could decide many things, but you can never go against the laws of the sea. It was the same for the gold immortals. Their abilities came from the great Dao that they had fused with. Therefore, the great Dao was their restraint, and the great Dao was also their hands and feet. The method they used to control the lower realm was through the great Dao. There would never be a situation where a golden immortal wielded a saber to chop down a demigod. This was the immortal in the hearts of mortals. It was a silly version of stage play, but it was not reality. What did a golden immortal do? They used their own innate Daos to control the acquired Daos that were formed from innate Daos. In other words, gold immortals could control true immortals and human immortals to a certain extent. However, it was not absolute. Some were disobedient, some were scheming, some were rebellious, some wanted to rebel, and some wanted to jump ship. After that, the true immortals and human immortals would go and control the various great Tao orthodoxies and major forces in the primary world. Layer by layer, they formed a strict system. Then, the demigods would control the true immortals. The true immortals would control the Yuanying. The Yuanying would be fierce to the Jindan. The Jindan would roar at the Foundation establishment. The Foundation establishment would abuse the Qi refinement. The Qi refinement cultivators were the unluckiest. The big fish would eat the small fish, and the small fish would eat the shrimps. This was the system principle of the cultivation world. Challenging people of a higher realm and managing people with long arms were taboo in the cultivation world. Of course, this was not absolute. There were also those who were disobedient, those who had ulterior motives, those who were rebellious, those who wanted to rebel, and those who wanted to jump ship. This created a wonderful and colorful world of cultivation. At the level of a golden immortal, they rarely paid attention to a specific event, specific period, or specific airspace. They controlled the overall situation, the direction, the trend, and the future plan that could easily last tens of thousands of years. When they made a certain decision, outsiders would often be baffled. They did not understand why the great Tao would change like this. Then, tens of thousands of years later, they would know, oh, so this was a reason. For example, when the five elements Taoist master adjusted the ratio of the power of the five elements, the effect gradually appeared 10,000 years later. The plants in the various astral realms were lush. Was this the true intention of the five elements Taoist master? No. The vegetation was lush, and the living conditions of living creatures improved. After tens of thousands of years, the population increased, and the demon beast had more room for development. Was this the true intention of the five elements Taoist master? No. The demon beast grew stronger, and the threat to humans also increased. The human cultivation forces began to shrink. Was this the true intention of the five elements Taoist master? No. The human cultivation forces shrank, and the upper realm was further suppressed. The situation of the immortal court changed subtly. In the myriad immortal assembly that was held once every million years, the five elements Taoist master was given an extra immortal peach. This might be a metaphor, but it was actually the principle of the golden immortals. If you had not lived for hundreds of thousands of years, you would not know what he wanted to do. However, the change of the era disrupted the usual rhythm of the golden immortals. They found that the goal that originally needed tens of millions of years to plan had been compressed to 20,000 years. The initiator was the Lord of Morals, Li Wuya. It was not that the golden immortals were not prepared for the change of the era. They were prepared. However, the mistake was that they did not have enough time to prepare. Li Wuya suddenly exerted his strength and compressed their plan that spanned millions of years to 20,000 years, or even shorter. After the Taoist Master of Destiny hit them while they were down, a few thousand years was not enough for the golden immortals to make long-term plans. Everything became urgent. There were many unsatisfactory things, many loopholes, many compromises, and many dismantling to make up for the mistakes. Because the great Tao was not something that could be achieved overnight. They understood this too well. What do you think of the sword Tao steel? A deep aura. The wings have been formed, and they are unstoppable. Another aura replied, they should not be blocked, because this block is blocking the momentum of the people. This child used the momentum to rise. It seems to be fooling around, but there's a deeper meaning behind it. The last aura said, however, The one with the most momentum might not necessarily succeed. This is the true meaning of concealing one's strength and biding one's time. This momentum will stop at the change of the era. Therefore, let him be. When the various Daos return to their positions and take what they need, these people will turn from challengers to Tao guardians. This spirit and momentum will naturally collapse. What is there to fear? The sharpness of the sword Tao is exposed, but does not harm the foundation. More importantly, there are a few great Daos that are very troublesome and will cause damage to the foundation of my great Tao. Devour, heavenly tribulation, and the new reincarnation. I have to keep an eye on these great Daos. Tell them that if they have no choice, I don't mind using some methods. Chapter 2374. Lu Xiaoyi began to concentrate on his sword Dao steel. Since he had started, he had to do it perfectly. It was not entirely for concealment, but also for the possibility of achieving Dao. Things that were purely spiritual did not have complicated details, nor did they have a huge spiritual system. It was simple to the point of being straightforward, direct to the point of being rude. It was to draw the sword. But the sword here was no longer a narrow, flying sword, but a spirit that dared to question, to overthrow, and to innovate. It could be reflected in all aspects of cultivation. It was all-encompassing and all-encompassing. He was very clear that it was not the true essence of this spirit to hang on with the change of the era. Otherwise, once these people achieved their goal, once this period of time passed, they would give up this spirit. This was not the true spirit of Sword Dao. So, what he wanted to do here was to extend this spirit and become the spiritual guide of cultivation in the future era. This was not originally in his plan, but the popularity of the Sword Dao steel gave him a new understanding. He also saw the possibility of carrying out a spirit that could only exist in the short term. Humans were eager for quick success, especially in the face of huge temptation. He had a lot of things to do to turn a short-term impulse into a long-term spirit. From a tactical point of view, this was probably his best method of concealment. Regarding this, he did not try to hide it. Whether it was the old friends who came or the new friends who just came, he would tell them all his ideas completely, hoping to get the greatest support and help in the promotion of his ideas. Some refused, some did not agree, but most of the cultivators still had a supportive attitude. After reaching this level, their understanding of Tao was no longer superficial. The so-called vision of a great cultivator was not a joke. In this kind of contact, the Sword Dao steel's Dao Qi canopy rose steadily and still maintained a jaw-dropping growth rate. It became the most dazzling one in the land of the Yellow Dragon recently. It was not until a few years later that the growth rate began to slow down. But this did not mean that the potential of the Sword Dao steel had been exhausted, but that the existing cultivators in the land of the Yellow Dragon had been exhausted. If they wanted to increase it, they could only wait for more cultivators to come. Unlike the other great Daos that were approved by the Heavenly Dao and recognized by humans, the Sword Dao tablet, which was a pure spiritual willpower type, had a very vague recognition from the Heavenly Dao. Its existence was more supported by human cultivators. Therefore, the Dao Qi crown finally stopped at a height of 120,000 feet. It was still far from those innate Daos that had a strong foundation. It wasn't because there were fewer people supporting it, but because it lacked the recognition of the Heavenly Dao. How to get the approval of the Heavenly Dao was a very troublesome problem. Lu Xiaoyi did not start on the second and third steels. It was still early, and there was no need to be impatient. It was far from time to reveal his true intentions. On this day, he was meditating in the Dao steel when a familiar guest barged in. That's a good move. Just the Sword Dao tablet alone has attracted so much attention. Just the side Dao is already so impressive. When the real Dao is brought out, I wonder what kind of scene it will be. The person who came was very polite. To him, it was not often that he complimented others. Lu Xiaoyi faintly smiled. Fellow Daoist, sin thinks too much. This is my righteous path. Thank you for reminding me of the fifth ring. It's very important to me. I can't thank you enough. I've been waiting for you for a long time, but I wonder why you're so late. Taoists smiled. It seems like you've approved of this humble Taoist qualifications for the exchange. Lu Xiaoyi did not avoid the question. It's not approval. It's just that you've already made your move, but I haven't yet. Taoist Tsin understood that this swordsman was still on guard against him. He would rather exchange one thing for another than take credit. In other words, he could ask the swordsman for help this time, but if he asked again, he would have to show his sincerity. It was a very snobbish way of doing things, but for their current status, it was the safest and most practical way. At this point in their cultivation, they were only 2 steps away from ascending to immortality. Who would be willing to step into someone else's quarrels? Even if it wasn't a trap, it would still bring about karma. It would only do more harm than good. Based on his temperament, this swordsman's way of doing things was exactly what he wanted. If it was too intimate, he wouldn't be able to accept it. Thus, he didn't beat around the bush. Do you know anything about the netherworld? Lu Xiaoyi spread his hands. I know nothing. Taoists nodded. That's true. It's normal for cultivators from the lower realms to not know much about it, because it's something that the immortal court has been working on for the past several 100,000 years. It's something new, and it's neither perfect nor against the rules. It's a field that's still being explored. Since you don't know anything about it, I'll explain it to you. The 2 of them asked and answered questions in the sword Dao style, opening up a field that Lu Xiaoyi had never come into contact with in his entire life. The netherworld is a myth that first appeared in folklore. It's also a strange story in the human universe. In the mortal world, the stories of gods and monsters are usually just rumors spread by chance. The more widely it spreads, the more it adds in the mortal's own understanding of the cultivation world. In the eyes of true cultivators, it's very funny. In a top-notch cultivation realm like yours, there are very few such legends. That's because mortals usually come into contact with a lot of cultivation matters, and their lives are closely related to cultivation. When it's close to the truth, there are very few distortions, and it's not strange at all. However, this kind of universal cultivation realm is very rare. For the vast majority of human planets, low to no spiritual vigor is the mainstream. It's just that cultivators like you basically don't understand it, because cultivators always have to move forward. There's no reason to turn back. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. He came from a lower 3 stars, so he could empathize with Taoists' words. In a planet with low spiritual vigor, it wasn't easy to see cultivators, so of course there was no way to understand it. Thus, it became a phenomenon that became more and more mysterious as it spread. Taoists smiled. But humans are such a strange race. Even if they can't cultivate and don't have the conditions to do so, their thoughts can still be as wild as a steed soaring across the sky. They can create a colorful world of gods and monsters for you. They can even create a system for you out of nowhere. Well, it's mainly those down-and-out literati who can't achieve high or low positions. They're good at writing, but they don't have the ability to pass the imperial examinations, and they don't have the strength to carry a plow into the fields. So they do their best to search for some scattered folklore in the mortal world and polish it themselves. They come up with a lot of jokes that make cultivators not know whether to laugh or cry. For example, do monsters necessarily eat humans? In fact, they don't know that since the beginning of cultivation, the number of monsters eaten by humans is countless times greater than the number of monsters eaten by humans. Chapter 2375. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. Maybe they think that monsters like to bully mortals? Taoist Sin snorted. Bully mortals? Then wouldn't it be worse for humans to bully mortal beasts? That's not the point. Humans have always thought of themselves as the highest level of living beings because they have words, because they have inheritances, because they no longer act on instinct. That's why humans think that it's normal for humans to eat beasts, because beasts aren't living beings in their eyes, but food. Of course, beasts can't eat humans because humans are of a higher level. They're masters. Oh, I'm getting off track. Where's I? Lu Xiaoyi held back his laughter. This Taoist Tsin might be an old man of the immortal court. Even after becoming an immortal, he still had such independent thoughts. Just based on this point alone, he was worthy of being friends with. You just said that some destitute human literati rely on making up stories about immortals to earn a living. Taoists continued. Yes, I'm talking about them. But there's no shortage of such people in every realm. No matter where in the universe, no matter what nook or cranny, as long as there are people, there will be such writers. Don't underestimate the power of these people. I don't know how they do it, but their lousy stories and preposterous nonsense can actually break through the barriers of the void and spread certain legends to the entire universe. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. That might mean that there's a commonality in human imagination. Is the conscious and unconscious transmission of mortal culture also part of it? Taoists sighed. Among these nonsense, the most popular, most widespread, and most deeply rooted legend is the Netherworld Kingdom. Could it be that this originates from humans' fear of death, their desire for reincarnation, their pursuit of truth, kindness, and beauty, their rejection of falsehoods? In any case, this legend is so widespread that it's even more widespread than the true legends of the cultivation world. Lu Xiaoyi was a little surprised. Could it be? Taoists snorted. Yes. Can you believe it? The wild imaginations of mortals can actually affect the thinking of golden immortals. Even those lousy pens could outline the future of the universe. Tens of thousands of years ago, for some unknown reason, a golden immortal proposed such an idea in Qingwei heaven. The excuse was nothing more than to share joy with the people. If the human cultivation ecology was described as a closed loop, then golden immortals should be the group closest to mortals, and so on. Since the netherworld was so popular in the mortal world, and there was such a market for it, why not go with the flow and do as they wished? It was to truly establish such a place, to continue the system of those lousy pen holders, and to create the netherworld. The benefit is that it can free the hearts of ordinary mortals. They will no longer be filled with fear of death, and they will turn to good and evil. It will promote the karma of good and evil. It will make the human world more harmonious and beautiful. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. As expected of a golden immortal, his thinking is so high. Taoistsen was disdainful. Superior? Tall later on, I understood that it was not the feelings of golden immortals and saints. It was that some people were worried about the future order of cultivation. Now it seems that they were worried that they would lose their privileges in the new era. Because cultivators have reincarnation, they can comprehend their previous lives, but mortals can't. They live a mediocre life and don't know what their previous lives were. They can only guess whether it was a horse or a cow, a pig or a dog, good or evil. Such a system has loopholes because it is not equal. It will affect the cornerstone of the entire great Tao of reincarnation. In order to change, in order to make up for the loopholes, the immortals figured out such a way to let mortals experience the pain and joy of reincarnation. In this way, the heavenly Tao can't find fault with reincarnation, and the cultivator's reincarnation cultivation can continue like this, and finally form a cultivation class. In the attempt to reincarnate in the mortal world, the netherworld appeared. Lu Xiaoyi was dumbfounded. There was actually such a thing. The underworld did not exist in the first place, but was simply a fabrication made up by mortals. In the end, the immortals used it for other purposes to consolidate their own reincarnation order. Was this a precautionary measure against the changing of the epoch? It might be, and it might not be, because the reincarnation Tao was the Tao that was most affected by human factors among the existing innate Tao. It was also the Tao that was most likely to be taken advantage of. The rules of reincarnation were not naturally formed, but the product of millions of years of constant consideration, compromise, and compromise by the golden immortals, especially the reincarnation Tao Master. It should be said that the immortals still had a sense of crisis. They had been vigilant about the existence of the reincarnation Tao since hundreds of thousands of years ago. Although the reincarnation Tao was insignificant in battle, It played an extremely important role in maintaining the order of cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi was somewhat incredulous. As you said, such a netherworld, under the control of the immortal court, is still not perfect after hundreds of thousands of years? Daoists smiled bitterly. This is not a realm. It is the entire universe of humans. Think about it. With such a massive scale, how are we going to establish a systematic underworld? Can it accommodate so many people? And it has to be similar to what those damned writers described. The key is, who is to be sent to manage such a netherworld? Lu Xiaoyi understood. Fellow Taoist, you are unwilling. Taoist's face was full of disgust. No one is willing. We were doing well in the immortal court, but we were demoted to that ghastly and dark place to manage some souls that should not exist in the world. Therefore, for hundreds of thousands of years, the managers of the netherworld were appointed by the immortal court, and they took turns to serve for 10,000 years. You can imagine how the immortals who were sent here felt. How did they do their best? The last batch was just in time for the change of era. Seeing that the immortal court was about to change, who would come to this nondescript place to waste time? When the new era came, it was hard to say whether the netherworld would still exist or not. Will we just stay here and wait for death? That's why I didn't want to come, so I was demoted to the lower realm. The story is unbearable to recall. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi had heard of this secret of the immortal court. Indeed, he couldn't blame Daoists for rebelling against the immortal court. If it were anyone else, they probably wouldn't have come. They might as well have been demoted to the lower realm. At the very least, they would still have eyes and ears, and they could still come in contact with the cultivation world of the universe. There was still a chance for them to make a comeback. He was a little curious. What was the situation with this half-completed underworld? Although it was inappropriate to be curious about such a messy thing at this point in time, he could guess that Daoists had asked him to help with nothing more than this. It was hard to imagine that the immortal court had copied something that came from the imaginations of mortals just like that. However, he still had a lot of questions. Then, what kind of souls are in the netherworld? Are they ordinary people, or do they include cultivators? Would all the dead go in and take a walk, or do they have a choice? Chapter 2376. Daoists looked at him with admiration. This swordsman had hit the nail on the head. First of all, cultivators won't be in the same reincarnation law as mortals. That's our definition of entering the Tao. Once you start cultivating, you'll change your life. The immortal court defined it this way to encourage more people to cultivate. Secondly, not every mortal will enter the netherworld after death. They'll be too busy. When I was in the immortal court, I heard the true immortal seniors occasionally mention that the great Tao of reincarnation is the brightest in the Qingwei heavens. Because it's running at full power, it consumes a lot of energy and is very tired. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. He deserves it. Daoists also laughed. Originally, it was only controlling the reincarnation of cultivators, and mainly those above the Yuaning realm, so it was easier. Now it's great. When dealing with all the living beings in the universe, including humans and demon beasts, the workload is more than 1,000,000 times greater. Therefore, the Golden Immortal's original intention was to deal with all the living beings in the universe, but they soon adjusted it to only deal with humans. It still wasn't enough, and there were still too many. Therefore, they only took 10% of humans. If it was still too much, they reduced it again. Since the opening of the netherworld hundreds of thousands of years ago until now, reincarnation Daolord would shrink every once in a while when he couldn't take it anymore. Now, they only take 1/10,000th of a mortal's life and death. The 10,000th of the most evil and the 10,000th of the most kind and virtuous were sent into the netherworld as a testing ground in an attempt to find out the rules of the netherworld. When everything matured, they slowly expanded it and finally expanded it to the entire human race. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. What kind of screening method is this? Shouldn't they choose the most universal people? Because most of the people in this world are ordinary people. You choose the 10,000th of the most evil and evil people, and then add in the 10,000th of the most kind and virtuous people. What will happen? Is there any guiding law? I can tell you that they all have one thing in common, and that is that they're all paranoid and only think about themselves. Taoist Sin spread his hands. You consider the problem from the perspective of human nature, while the immortal court considers the problem from the perspective of management. Their positions are different, so of course their views are different. With the 10,000th of the most evil and the most kind people, you can find out the limit of the netherworld's punishment and reward the good. Otherwise, how did the 18 levels of hell come about? How would he be sentenced? How to institutionalize all of this? Refinement. Could it be that they really had to station the cultivators one by one to investigate the cases? In order to straighten out the relationship between hell in a short period of time, Cheney would have to first establish a framework for the system, identify the boundaries of behavior, and then deal with the problems of most ordinary people. You're too idealistic, Superintendent. Lu Xiaoyi did not argue. It was meaningless. In fact, he was just guessing. His intuition told him that this was not the right thing to do. However, he had never been to the underworld, so he could not make any rash comments. After Taoist Sin briefly introduced the netherworld, he finally got to the point. The era is about to change. None of the immortals are in the mood to manage the netherworld, even if it's just for show. I didn't go, so I was demoted. The next one was worried about being punished by the immortal court, so I held my nose and went. In the end, I broke my Tao and was eliminated after a few hundred years. What bad luck! This time, the immortal court could no longer find fault with me, and no one took the initiative to resist. In the end, everyone pretended to be ignorant and let the netherworld be in a state of laissez-faire. In any case, it's only 1,000 or 2,000 years. When the new era begins, the netherworld will disappear on its own. No one can blame this rotten debt, and no one will be implicated. This is the current situation of the netherworld. Lu Xiaoyi was very curious. Then, who's in charge of the netherworld now? It can't be that the evil and the good are self-governing, right? Taoist Sun looked at him. This is why I'm here to ask for your help. I've been to the netherworld, and it's precisely because I hate the environment there that I've rejected it. But it's also because I've been there that I'm very worried about the current situation of the netherworld. He sighed. The immortal court established the netherworld to achieve its goal through the expansion of the reincarnation system. First, everyone's 5 fortunes and 5 virtues were judged whether a person was good or evil. There was a very specific standard for how good they were and how evil they were. After all, it's impossible for there to be such an organization that has the ability to judge everyone's good and evil. Therefore, in the early days of the netherworld's establishment, this system was actually a huge project that involved the cooperation of many innate great Taoists. But now, the 5 fortunes are gone, and a very important reference system is missing. Later on, the 5 virtues were also gone, and the netherworld became completely blind. Without the foundation to judge good and evil, how is the netherworld going to recruit people? In order to maintain the basic operation of the netherworld, it could only recruit people randomly. In other words, after the 5 virtues were completely destroyed, the netherworld standard for recruiting people was no longer the best and the worst, but a random selection. The composition of the netherworld finally changed from the sharp opposition between good and evil to a 3-way tug of war, with ordinary people joining in the middle. That's when the trouble began. Taoist Sin explained, the immortal court sent the immortals to control the netherworld in order to get the results. They didn't dare to imagine that the immortals would really work here without complaint and do their best. Therefore, they only cared about their own cultivation and name and left the specific matters to their subordinates. The so-called subordinates are the things in the legends of the mortals, such as the 10 kings of hell, the ox head and horse face, the black and white impermanence, and so on. They all follow the script of the mortals. Don't they like this kind of thing? It's more ritualistic. As for how these people were selected, it's been a long time, and no one cares about it. It's probably because the immortals who were in charge of the first few rounds used some unknown method to find them, or maybe they just casually pointed at them and did it half-heartedly. After that, The immortals were too lazy to change. These so-called Netherworld's bureaucrats didn't dare to do anything to the immortals in charge. At least, they were respectful and obedient when it came to dealing with the immortals. They had some ability to do things, and so they continued to be in charge. These people were the ones in charge of the Netherworld. I don't know what they'll do without the supervision of the immortals, but based on my life experience, no matter if they're evil or good, once you give them a certain amount of power, they'll actually become the same kind of people. Daoist's expression became serious. The Netherworld is a very special place. It's a special space that the Golden Immortals specially set up for the souls of mortals. In order to achieve their goal, they put a lot of effort into it. According to the information I received, the Netherworld has been without an immortal for a long time, so the situation is very bad. If the mortals here are allowed to reincarnate, they'll hide their negative energy, which will be detrimental to the common people. They'll be the catalyst for disaster in the mortal world. I'll be honest with you. In order to succeed in becoming an immortal again, I need this kind of virtue. Therefore, I want to enter the Netherworld as a non-immortal and completely solve the hidden dangers of the Netherworld before the change of era. Are you willing to help me? Chapter 2377. Lu Xiaoyi knew he didn't have the right to refuse, and he didn't want to always owe someone a favor. It was too uncomfortable. Fellow Taoist, you don't have to ask whether I'm willing or not. Moreover, from what you've said, it might not be a bad thing for me. Sambai was very satisfied. Why did he ask this swordsman for help? Strength was one thing, but being honest, not putting on airs, and not being pretentious was another thing. The cornerstone of cooperation was honesty, and the worst thing to do was to pretend to be obedient. As for the matter of the Netherworld, if we can succeed, we'll be able to find a proper place for these souls, even if they aren't truly human anymore. That'll be a good deed. It'll be of great benefit to both of us. The era is about to change, and we're in the midst of establishing the Tao. It's not wrong for everyone to put all their energy into this, but it's because their vision isn't broad enough. I've been an immortal for 1,000,000 years, and while I don't dare to say that I understand everything, I still have a certain understanding of how the heavenly Tao operates. In my opinion, if you want to succeed in establishing the Tao, you'll have to do it not only within the Tao, but also outside it. Lu Xiaoyi nodded in agreement. Taoists smiled. The era is about to change, and the universe will experience countless calamities. This is the pain of the revolution, and it's unavoidable. For cultivators, it might affect their futures, but for mortals, it affects their lives. This kind of loophole can be found everywhere in the universe's revolution. Therefore, how we, those who dream of establishing the Tao, clean up the mess caused by the universe's changes is actually a very important part of obtaining the will of the heavens. Taoistsin was very frank, because he really did need this swordsman's help. Judging from this person's past, his ability to deal with complicated matters was astonishing. Not only was he strong, but he also had wisdom and methods. Every time he came up with a new pivot, it was refreshing. He needed this swordsman's sincere help, and not just going through the motions without putting in any effort. It's like the Fifth Ring's disaster. What Superintendent C did, he saved billions of lives. This isn't just for show. The will of the heavens can feel it. I've contributed to this, and I can also share the will of the heavens. This is another cornerstone of establishing the Tao. Most people can't understand this kind of cornerstone, so it's a waste of effort to stay here. The path of the Tao encompassed too many things. It wasn't just about the profundities of your Tao realm. It was also about how widespread it was and how lofty one's intentions were. I reckon that with so many people studying each great Tao and learning from each other, the difference in Tao realms would be limited in the end. Then, if there's no difference in Tao realms, I'm afraid it would be a competition of things outside Tao. That's what you and I are going to do. Lu Xiaoyi sighed in his heart. There were no fools in this world of cultivation. What Sambai was doing was actually what he was going to do in the Heavenly Choice continent. It was the same thing, wiping the buttocks of the epic change. As long as you wiped it clean, soaked it in hot water, and massaged it a few times, the chances of establishing your Tao would greatly increase. This was not because the heavenly Tao was selfish, but because the heavenly Tao was also using this opportunity to observe whether the person who established the Tao had the intention to be kind to the common people. Thus, he smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist, if you had said so earlier, why would we still talk about the exchange of benefits? It was all for one goal. You and I both have our own plans for the 5 rings. It's the same for the netherworld. In the future, I might have other troubles to look for a fellow Taoist for the same reason." Senpai laughed. It was indeed comfortable to talk to smart people. "Oh, there's more? When the time comes, feel free to ask. The more such things, the better. There's no reason to push it away. Put away the Sword Tao tablet. At most a year, at least a few months. I will definitely come and look for you. Let's go to the netherworld and see what we can do for those ownerless souls." Wiping the buttocks of the golden immortals, I never thought I would have such an opportunity. Senpai laughed and left, leaving Lu Xiaoyi in deep thought. The simplest way to see if there were any changes was Lu Xiaoyi released his own auspicious cloud. His auspicious cloud had never been deliberately strengthened or thickened. To a small universe body like him, the auspicious cloud would change as his great Tao expanded. Everything was up to fate and nature. He rarely used his auspicious cloud. It was not that the auspicious cloud was not useful, but that he had too many tricks up his sleeves. His attacks were too fast, to the point that he did not need the auspicious cloud's protection most of the time. After coming out of the cave, he had been busy. He did not have the time to observe the changes in his auspicious cloud. The auspicious cloud no longer had an obvious great Tao bias, because he understood too much the old Khanate great Tao and the new great Tao mixed together. The nature of the auspicious cloud began to develop in the direction of a true small universe. When the auspicious cloud condensed, Lu Xiaoyi immediately discovered some incredible changes. This was not the power of will, nor was it faith, nor was it incense. It was as if all of these had been mixed together. Then, through the reflection of certain line of sight, the auspicious cloud became even denser. There was a sense of clarity in the dense cloud. Heaven, earth, and man were Taoist terms. In fact, at his level, the meaning of these 3 words had a deeper meaning. Heaven represented the heavenly heart and heavenly Tao. Earth represented the cultivation of cultivators. Man was everything in the mortal world. Everything he did in the 5 rings deeply affected the gaze of the heavenly heart and the recognition of the mortal world. This was extremely important for someone who wanted to change the order. Balance was everywhere. If you want to change, subvert, and reorganize the order, you have to bear the backlash of change. Virtue carries all things. Virtue can also change. This made him understand the crux of why the majority of changes would not succeed based on hot-bloodedness. It was because you did not have enough virtue to bear it. This virtue was not one's so-called noble and pure character, which was to be outstanding but to be pure, to rise from the mud but not be tainted. Instead, it was to actually do some things because the heavenly Tao was not blind. It could clearly distinguish the difference between talking and doing things. Senpai needed this to ascend to immortality. He needed it even more because he had to bear the backlash of subversion. It was also because of this understanding that he was even more clear that Qing Xian and Yin Shan would never succeed, because they did not have enough virtue. This kind of virtue, he had been doing it all along, even from Jin Dan onwards. It was a kind of intuition. He knew that he could do great things in the future, so he did his best to increase his virtue. This kind of accumulation did not happen overnight. It ran through his entire cultivation career. What kind of virtue was the most favored by the heavenly Tao? All round? Big enough? 10 billion in the 5 rings? 100 billion in the heavenly choice? Yes and no. There was another kind of virtue that was above all, and that was being consistent from beginning to end. Lu Xiaoyi had been doing this ever since he stepped onto the path of cultivation. Since he was thrown into the first boundary of the void of the universe, since Hasa Planet, he had never stopped. It was not like he was in a hurry to make last-minute efforts when a new era was about to arrive. It was only intentional, so there was no end. This was his point of view. Did Taoists understand? Cultivation had already begun from the first day you stepped onto the path of Tao. Chapter 2378. I'm going to save the common people. These are the words Lu Xiaoyi left for his friends in the sword Tao steel. Although he knew it would provoke endless curses, he couldn't control his surging, mischievous heart. With Qing Xian and the others around, the early preparations were no problem. Then, he would make a dazzling entrance and raise his arms. As a leader, he had to have the temperament of a leader. If he did everything, how would his subordinates earn a living? The two gathered outside the circular space. Taoistsen was wearing a loose robe. The plan he'd been preparing for a long time was about to begin. This was also a very important part of his process of climbing up the ranks. Just as he said, he needed to do his best to fight for the will of the heavens. The fifth ring was a good opportunity, but he couldn't take it all. He couldn't meddle with the bandits' domain at all. Although he was a half-immortal, he was once an immortal. The people of the fifth ring wouldn't care about him. Therefore, he could only give up this opportunity and give it to the native of the fifth ring, Lu Cheng, while he took the secondary merit. However, this time, it was an opportunity that belonged solely to him. He was the master, and the sword cultivator was the secondary. Have you been to splendid heaven and earth? Lu Xiaoyi was startled. I have. I'm quite familiar with it. Why? Is the Netherworld Kingdom located there? Taoists nodded. Exactly. It's the largest mortal domain in the universe. It's much larger than your fifth ring. At present, it seems that only the Heaven's Choice continent is larger than it. However, Heaven's Choice won't last for long, so it's most suitable to set up the Netherworld Kingdom there. This was a realm of mortals, a true realm of mortals, an incomparably large mortal domain. The so-called true mortal domain referred to the fact that it wasn't a place for cultivation even in the ancient and primeval times. It wasn't like many other mortal realms, which were just products of cultivation planets that gradually fell behind. From the very beginning, there was no possibility of spiritual opportunity here. It wasn't in the past, it wasn't in the present, and it wouldn't be in the future. Therefore, everything in a mortal world was the same here. The people had no concept of cultivation from the root of their minds. Furthermore, there were scholars who condemned gods and monsters. This was destined to be a cultivation desert. It was precisely because of such an environment that it became the birthplace of countless legends of gods and monsters in the imagination of mortals. It was also a garbage dump for countless people to earn money through writing. He was a little surprised, but it was also reasonable. Let's meet at splendid heaven and earth and enter the netherworld from there. It's the easiest place for us to enter in our current state. Otherwise, I'm afraid we'll die in there. Then you'll have a chance to taste Meng Po's soup. Speaking of which, these mortals are really imaginative. Who came up with the idea of Meng Po's soup? The two of them stood up as they chatted and laughed. Through the inner and outer scenic heavens, they began their journey to hell. Outside the splendid world, the two figures stood side by side. Taoistsen was very curious. This splendid land is a strange place. Once a cultivator enters, they will lose all their abilities. How did you enter back then? How did you get out? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. It's the Heaven's Eyes mission. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have come here. I was wondering why my abilities were sealed so tightly back then. I thought that it was the work of a true immortal. Now it seems that it was the work of a gold immortal. No wonder. Taoists nodded. Heaven's Eyes? Then that's right. No cultivator will enter this place voluntarily. Once they enter, how to get out is also a big problem. Without the guidance of an immortal from the outside, the cultivator who enters will have his abilities sealed. He will be immortal for the rest of his life. This is also the protection of the immortal court for the splendid land. Otherwise, how could it avoid the infiltration of the cultivation world? The secret of the netherworld would also be exposed. We don't have to enter the netherworld. The setup of the netherworld is very delicate. There's something fishy about it. Lu Xiaoyi originally thought that since he had come to the splendid world, he should at least take a look at Shi Zhao and the others. Since he didn't have to enter the netherworld, he could only leave it to fate. However, he was also curious. Was there any connection between the passageway guarded by Shi Zhao and the netherworld? They were all ownerless souls. Could it be that the swordsmen were actually members of the netherworld? Why didn't he hear them mention it? Taoist Sun raised his hand to set up the array. When we were still immortals, this was just a matter of lifting our feet. Now that we can't, there are a lot of trivial matters. Guard C, come and see how to set up this netherworld passage array. If you have time, you can come and play. Lu Xiaoyi was a little speechless. I don't have this hobby. There are no relatives or friends in there to take care of. Old Sin, will the immortal court know if we go in like this? Taoist Sin sneered. If they want to know, they will definitely know. But I'm afraid they don't have the time to take care of this place. If they can't handle the living, who will take care of the dead? Even if they know, I'm afraid they will be happy to see it happen, right? Don't worry. They have always been very open-minded about things that are beneficial to them. As they spoke, the netherworld passage array was formed. It wasn't a complicated transportation array. It was just a little tricky. Some of the node's coordinates could never be guessed. Once the array was formed, the two entered one after the other. The transportation array disappeared as if they had never been there. This was a place filled with Shi, filled with ghostly shadows and indistinct screams. Mortals would lose control of their minds when they first arrived at this place, and their physical bodies would not be able to withstand the Shi of the netherworld. However, for the two of them, who were used to seeing big scenes, it did not matter much to them. Lu Xiaoyi silently checked his body. It was the same as when he first came to the splendid continent. All his abilities were gone, and he was sealed tightly. The first time he came here, he was at the first step of the primordial spirit realm. Now he was at the first step of the yang spirit realm. The difference wasn't too big, but this was the work of golden immortals. There was no room for discussion. Taoists smiled. Not used to it? Just get used to it. The restrictions of golden immortals can't be broken unless the epic changes. This is another reason why I'm looking for you. Even if a swordsman doesn't have any divine abilities, the sword in his hand isn't too bad. But if it's a law cultivator, he's basically useless and can't help. Lu Xiaoyi asked, what are the levels of the so-called threats here? Taoists smiled. It's not worth mentioning. Under the seal of golden immortals, you and I were suppressed to this extent. You can imagine the abilities of these ghostly creatures. However, the Qi of the netherworld still has some nourishing effects on ghosts that have lived for a long time. So, there are some who have incomparable strength and can jump as if they're flying. After all, immortals rely on them to manage too many living souls. They can only be given some abilities in the current environment to do things well. Yes, I'm talking about those ghost officials. In mortal terms, they're the 10 Yama kings and their subordinates. There are too many legends about the netherworld. They're illogical and often contradictory. There's also no standard that's accurate in the universe. So, the immortal court omitted some occupations like the Ghost Emperor and Xidagarba. They just used the 10 Yama King system. This is probably the most popular legend. Chapter 2379. Lu Xiaoyi was very serious, because in essence, he was a person who was used to thinking about problems from the perspective of battle. Old Sin, when was the last time you came here? Taoists laughed. This swordsman acted ruthlessly in the origin world, but he was actually a very cautious person. He couldn't be blamed for thinking too much. After all, this was the swordsman's first time here, and he was a complete stranger, unlike Taoists who came here as an immortal. The last time I came here was 2,000 years ago. At that time, I had already been deposed by the immortal court. I came here by chance and found something wrong, but I didn't understand the problem of establishing a Tao at that time, so I didn't take it to heart. Don't worry. Even though I came here as a half-immortal, I didn't meet any truly troublesome enemies, just a few. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Old Sin, Let's not hold back anymore, okay? If there's really no problem, why did you ask me to come here? You think you have too much merit, so you're looking for someone to share it with? Daoistson was a bit embarrassed. The swordsman wasn't knowledgeable, but he wasn't good at fighting. Even a million-year-old immortal court rarely fought with others, and even if they did, it was within the immortal court's rules. How could it be as vicious as the origin world? Of course, he had his own way of fighting, and it was a very powerful way of fighting. However, that was referring to facing normal opponents in the normal world. In this place, the environment was abnormal, and the sword cultivator was also a freak. Therefore, his little bit of fighting ability was really not enough. We're just here for a stroll, and it won't affect the order of this place, so of course there's no problem. But if we want to change something, we'll affect the interests of these ghost officials. These things rely on their thick skin to adapt to the environment, so they're really hard to deal with. That's why I asked Guardian C to come along, but Lu Xiaoyi sighed. You're just looking for a fighter? No problem, I don't mind. But since we're already here, Old Sin, you should at least tell us your plan. You can't just blindly go around like this, right? Sun Bai's expression became serious. I was just about to mention it to Guardian C. I came here this time because of the unbearable atmosphere in Duan Su's place. I can't bear to see the arrogance and resentment here, which will affect their future reincarnation. He didn't want to force it either. After being an immortal for so many years, he had at least understood one thing. Force would never solve the problem at its root. Since there hasn't been an immortal to manage this place for so many years, could I take this opportunity to pretend to be an immortal's emissary and guide the operation of the underworld as an immortal and correct some of the habits that have gone astray? You shouldn't underestimate such a change. Although this place only accepts the deaths of 20,000 ordinary people in the universe, which doesn't sound like a lot, the absolute number is still terrifying. Eliminating the negative energy of these souls will have a huge impact on their behavior after reincarnation. After all, these souls weren't ordinary people when they were alive. They were all outstanding talents among the mortals. These ghost officials don't have access to the upper realm, so they don't have any sources of information. I'm also very familiar with the operating habits of the immortals here, so this strategy has a high chance of success. The reason why he called the custodian here was to prepare for any eventualities. If there were any stubborn people who refused to listen to his advice, he would be killed immediately. Of course, it's not easy for an immortal's emissary from the upper realm like me to do such a task. It's just right to leave it to you. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. So you're here to pretend to be an imperial envoy? Old Manson, I'm afraid you've read too many novels about the mortal world. Since Daoistson was an immortal's emissary, Lu Xiaoyi's position was only left with a strong man. As the immortal's emissary's attendant, he had to do odd jobs. Now he also had to do the chauffeur job. This was a very flashy antler carriage. The 4 immortal deers were very handsome, and the carriage was very luxurious. Lu Xiaoyi cracked his whip in the driver's seat and asked, "Why can't I take anything from splendid storage ring the last time I came here, but I can take anything from here?" Daoistson chuckled. The restrictions in the real mortal world are a bit stricter. The netherworld is full of ownerless souls, so in order to shock them and proclaim the might of the netherworld, the restrictions are a bit looser. However, the things you can bring out are just for show. They don't have any power, they just look different. This carriage is just for show. It can't fly fast, and it doesn't have any functions. But since I'm a master, I can't just walk here, can I? In the dusky underworld, the deer carriage spiraled down. Gradually, a man-made underworld appeared in front of Lu Xiaoyi's eyes. The entire underworld was like a huge sinkhole. This was to correspond to the 18 layers of hell that mortals imagined. According to Daoistson, the underworld was originally shaped like a pagoda. Because it didn't conform to the aesthetics of mortals and didn't fit the gloomy atmosphere, it later became a sinkhole. This was a world surrounded by the yin-chi of the netherworld. Only in this environment could the fragile souls of mortals not dissipate. Instead, they could roughly take on the appearance they had when they were alive. They had all kinds of emotions, and the bodies formed by yin-chi could feel pain. This was in preparation for punishment. The system is incomplete, contradictory, and lacks logic. This is the underworld that mortals imagined. The golden immortals thought of it quite well at first, but ever since this sinkhole was created, it has been constantly changing in contradiction. Even now, they still haven't figured it out. There are many reasons for this. The immortals who were sent here were purely idling around. None of them really put any thought into this place. The immortal court didn't invest much in this place, and now they're even on the verge of giving it up. Furthermore, the thoughts of ordinary mortals are really unreasonable. How in the world did they manage to put all these random things together? Death, reincarnation, and rebirth. This was originally a very serious process, but they turned it into a farce. It was no wonder that Taoists kept complaining. To strict cultivators, some of the thoughts of ordinary mortals were truly a disaster. They were hopelessly naive. The management system was full of mistakes and contradictions. It was as bloated as the mortal world. The worst thing was that they had no choice but to use strict cultivation methods to reflect this absurdity. This simply made people collapse. It was no wonder that so many immortals came to manage this place, but none of them were willing to take over. To them, this was an insult to cultivation. They yearned for truth, kindness, and beauty, so they came up with the idea of torturing these wicked people in the 18 levels of hell. They wanted them to turn over a new leaf here and become good people after reincarnation. This is understandable. But the worst thing is that the executors are themselves. Therefore, in the underworld, whether it's the good or the evil, they're all more capable of torturing people than the wicked. Mixed together like this, it's already impossible to distinguish who's good and who's evil. It's also impossible to determine whether they can eliminate their anger after reincarnation, or if they'll become even more paranoid and crazy. The main thing we're going to deal with now is these guys who used to have boundless glory in the world of the living. Now, they've already become fat bureaucrats. Their smiles are sweeter than honey, but their methods are incomparably cruel. You have to admit that these guys are full of talent in the punishment of the 18 levels of hell. Chapter 2380. In the sinkhole, apart from the 18 layers of hell, there were also 10 great halls. Taoists ordered, go to King Qingguang's palace. There's a palace bell there that can summon everyone for a meeting. The deer carriage spiraled down. No ghosts cheered, and no souls were afraid. All the souls here were in a state of numbness. No ghost officials came out to welcome them, especially since no immortals had appeared for thousands of years. Naturally, they did not consider the possibility of immortals appearing. Outside King Qingguang's palace hung a huge bell, the death knell. Lu Xiaoyi floated to the front of the bell and picked up the drumstick. His way of moving here was floating, but this floating was not caused by magic. Everything here was floating. It was like walking normally in the mortal world. There was no ground here. For whom does the death knell tolls? Lu Xiaoyi sighed as he raised the drumstick and smashed it down with all his might. This was a very strange journey. The goal was unclear, the method was unreliable, and the targets were not humans. This was a completely unfamiliar system. Not only did it refer to the officials of the netherworld, it also included the power system that he was most concerned about. The dull sound of the death knell reverberated throughout the sinkhole. It was made of special materials and deliberately lowered the frequency of the bell, causing people's hair to stand on end. This was done deliberately by the immortals to create a gloomy atmosphere. Everything was done to destroy the will of the soul. Of course, this might not be the intention of the immortals. Who asked the mortals to think so? Although the sound of the bell was low, it was extremely penetrating. Almost in an instant, countless figures flew out from each of the halls. Those souls who were numb, like walking corpses, widened their eyes in horror. They could not help but look for a place to lean on, then poke their heads out and anxiously waited for a possible change. They had long been used to it. There was no worst, only worse. The first to arrive was King Qingguang. He was a fat man with a big belly. There was a tumor on the top of his head. His eyebrows were slanted, his eyes were bulging, and his mouth was like a blood basin. His upper body was extremely long and fat, and his lower body had 2 legs. He was dressed in a red robe and looked extremely extravagant, as if he wanted to hang all his belongings on it. Behind him was a group of subordinates. They were tall, short, fat, thin, and had different appearances. However, they all had one thing in common, which was that they were extremely ugly and ferocious. One look, and anyone could tell that they were not good people. Upon hearing Lu Xiaoyi's sigh, Daoistsen, who was sitting in a carriage, also felt very helpless. You can't blame the immortal court for having poor taste. Who asked the mortal world to describe the people of the underworld in such a way? All the realms, all the character designs, and all the characters of the netherworld were inseparable from the essence of evil and ugly. They didn't understand what cultivation was, so they simply thought that the good must be handsome and the bad must be ugly. It took a lot of effort for the first immortal who managed the underworld to find such a large group of repulsive immortals. Later immortals simply couldn't be bothered to look for them. Let's just make do with it. Seeing these ghost officials dilly-dallying not far away, it seemed like they were waiting for everyone to gather before coming over to meet them. It was very strange. There are many subordinates. Did every hall have to be equipped with a bureaucratic system? From what I see, each hall seems to have a judge, Zhong Kui black and white impermanence, ox head, horse face, Meng Pa. Daoistsen was actually too lazy to explain because everything in this place made him speechless. But since Swordsman asked, he had no choice but to waste his breath. According to the understanding of mortals, after a person dies, the black and white impermanence will go and capture the soul. The judge will judge the person, and Oxhead and Horseface will be hired thugs. In the end, the king of hell will convict the person. After being tortured enough, they will be handed over to Meng Po to be fed soup. That's roughly the procedure. But there are actually many loopholes in this. First of all, if the black and white impermanents are relied on to capture people, they will be exhausted to death. If that's the case, the underworld might need thousands of black and white impermanents. It's also impossible for the judge to judge the past of these souls one by one. That would be a terrible debt. Just look at the Yamen of the mortal world. It's clear that they can't afford it. Meng Pa, on the other hand, has nothing to do. In fact, she doesn't need to be fed soup at all. Because of the mystery of being in the womb, the soul is destined to reincarnate without leaving behind any memories. Even cultivators can't do that, let alone ordinary mortals. That's why it's just spicy soup. It's made according to Meng Po's preferences. She uses whatever ingredients she has on hand. It's purely ritualistic. There are many similar things that everyone is fooling around with, but I don't know who they're fooling. Daoistsen's complaints were endless. Therefore, the Golden Immortals originally wanted to establish a system similar to the reincarnation of cultivators through the underworld, and at the same time achieve the goal of punishing evil and promoting good. But after so many years, they found that they didn't do anything except establish a corrupt system in the underworld. In fact, it's 100 times darker than the mortal world, because there's no cultivation power to balance it. As Daoistsen chattered on, the 10 kings of hell finally gathered. The 10 kings of hell, King Qingguang, King Chujiang, King Songdi, King Corner, King Yinluo, King Pingding, King Taishan, King Dushi, King Bianqing, and King Zhuanlun stepped forward in unison. King Qingguang said, "Esteemed immortal, we came late to welcome you. Please forgive us for our negligence." They were looking at the deer carriage. Apart from immortals, no one in the underworld could use such a cultivation artifact, nor could they afford to use it. Daoistsen's clear voice rang out. "I'm Immortal Official Beizong. This time, I've been ordered to come here because the underworld hasn't returned to the order of the immortal court for 3,000 years. It has lost control and is extremely chaotic, betraying the virtue of the heavenly Tao. You should gather in Qingguang Hall and prepare for palace affairs. Wait for my instructions." He didn't hold back and went straight to the point. This was also the usual way immortals managed the underworld. With some ghosts, even if they were powerful ghosts, what was there to be polite about? Of course, he was pretending to be an esteemed immortal, but it was precisely because of this that he couldn't be soft-spoken. Otherwise, there were many evil people here, and each of them was old and cunning. If he wasn't careful, he would be seen through. The kings of hell were submissive. They had long been used to this way of getting along with immortals, so they didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. It was just that they had lost their dignity. In this place, losing face in front of immortals wasn't a problem. As long as they could maintain their status, everything else didn't matter. In their opinion, every time an immortal came down, it was basically the same thing. They would first use big words to suppress you, then pretend to flip through the files. What would they really find? As long as everyone behaved respectfully, had a sincere attitude, and knew that they would correct their mistakes, they would at least be perfunctory for a while. This was their experience. They had been doing procedures for tens of thousands of years, so it wasn't a big deal. These ghost officials lined up in 2 rows respectfully. God knows where they got a red carpet from. There was the sound of music, and there were many ceremonial guards. It was as if they had done everything a human emperor would do. This was probably the most ceremonious ceremony they could think of, but there was nothing they could do about it. Who asked them to not be cultivators? Chapter 2381. After a set of solemn procedures, Taoists finally got off the deer carriage and arrived at Qingguang's main hall, escorted by a group of ghost officials. He sat down on the main seat, with a servant standing beside him. The ghost officials below him kowtowed, just like a court in the mortal world. It was quite realistic. Lu Xiaoyi hugged the golden sword breaker and tried his best to act like the legendary strongman, even though he had never seen a real strongman of the immortal court. The golden sword breaker was given to him by Dao's son and was also an immortal artifact. Its material wasn't bad, but it was a bit heavy. With his current seal body, it might not be easy for him to use it as a sword. From the beginning to the end, Taoists hadn't revealed to him how he planned to reform the netherworld. He also didn't ask because it involved the division of merits in the future. If he came up with an idea, how would the debt be settled in the end? Would he steal the limelight? Although the 2 of them had a good relationship now, it wasn't to the point where they could respectfully give up their merits. Lu Xiaoyi had already gained a big advantage in the collision of the 5 rings. Now it was Taoist's turn. This was the tacit understanding between cultivators. However, he wasn't optimistic about Taoist's trip to the netherworld. Although it was his first time here, the oppressive and gloomy atmosphere made him very uncomfortable. Although this was how the netherworld should be in the eyes of mortals, that was only the way of thinking of mortals. How could he expect this kind of atmosphere to eliminate the resentment? He was afraid that it would only increase the resentment. In his opinion, this wasn't something that could be completely solved by changing the system. Moreover, the system would also change. Without an immortal watching over this place, it would return to its original state as soon as you left. However, he couldn't say anything right now. This time, Taoistsen was in charge. He was a strong man. What was a strong man? It meant that he only used his strength and didn't use his brain. Taoistsen pretended to flip through the files, but it was actually meaningless. For thousands of years, countless mortals had reincarnated here. There are no traces of their previous lives and no traces of their afterlives. Their experiences in the netherworld were even worse. Wasn't it easy to write down what they wanted? However, this was a necessary foreplay. Even an egg had to be picked out to have a bone. There was only one purpose: to beat them. After knocking on the doors for several hours, not a single one of the officials of hell showed any signs of impatience. He listened very seriously and reflected on himself from time to time. There was even a special scribe who was writing rapidly, afraid that he would miss a single word. Lu Xiaoyi saw this and couldn't help but sigh again. This kind of behavior could only mean 2 things. Either they were sincerely trying to turn over a new leaf, or they were just a bunch of sly old officials trying to fool their superiors. What kind of meat do you think these old cats that have been serving for tens of thousands of years will be? Lu Xiaoyi didn't remind him. To an immortal who had lived for 1,000,000 years, reminding him was an insult. Taoist Tsin nodded in satisfaction. Regardless of whether he was really satisfied or not, he had to pretend to be satisfied, especially when he was still a fake. I have 10 plans for reforming hell. Today I'll pass them down. You all should act according to them. I believe it won't be long before we can restore hell to its former glory. Taoist Tsin's dignified gaze swept across the ghosts. He saw a series of uneasiness and disdain in his heart. Sure enough, they're showing their true colors now that they're serious. However, this couldn't stop his determination. He had been preparing for this for many years. First, hell's ghost officials have a fixed rank every 100 years. Those who are capable will be promoted, and those who are mediocre will be demoted. Everyone can be the king of hell of the 10 palaces. No one is allowed to sit in their positions without doing anything, and no one is allowed to bully others. Second, establish a system of mutual supervision and reporting, and resolutely crack down on those who act to satisfy their own selfish desires. Third, the 18 layers of hell are too cruel. There's a risk of overcorrection. We need to be more differentiated and humane. Taoists rambled on, while Lu Xiaoyi began to slowly relax his muscles and bones. He stretched his arms and legs, preparing to kill. This kind of method wasn't to change, but to cause trouble. Sure enough, before Taoist Tsin could finish speaking, the ghost officials below all revealed their ferocious eyes. That bit of respect and docility was gone, and they began to reveal their true colors. King Qingguang stood up and questioned loudly, "Exalted immortal, are you not letting your subordinates have an easy time? Every one of us here has served the immortal court for at least tens of thousands of years, and some have even served for more than 100,000 years. Especially us, the kings of hell, we grew up together with hell. Even if we didn't make any contributions, we've still worked hard. Just because of exalted immortal's words, everything we've done has gone down the drain. The heavenly Tao is unfair. It treats souls like straw dogs. Please forgive us for not being able to accept such an order to get rid of the donkey after it has outlived its usefulness." He wasn't the only one. The other 9 kings of hell behind him, as well as their subordinates, all began to get agitated. Their momentum was so great that it was as if they wanted to tear off the roof of Qingguang Hall. Taoist Tsin, on the other hand, was very calm. He acted like a true immortal, fearless in the knowledge that he had backing. The rules of hell are set by the immortal court, not you. What? Do you really think you're the master of this place after acting like a tyrant for tens of thousands of years? If the immortal court can give it to you, it can naturally take it back. If you keep blabbering, I'm afraid you won't even be able to keep your souls intact. After all, Taoist Tsin had some understanding of this place. He knew that he couldn't be soft in front of these wily old foxes. If he were to be soft, he could forget about succeeding in his reforms in the future. A ghost king stepped forward. It was none other than King Yanluo. "Exalted immortal is right. Everything we have is given to us by the immortal court. Otherwise, who knows how many reincarnations we've reincarnated and suffered. We thank the immortal court and respect it. Even if the immortal court wants us to die right now and reincarnate to become cattle or horses, we'll have no objections. But, exalted immortal, can you really represent the immortal court?" Taoist Tsin knew that things weren't going well, so he forced himself to remain calm. "What? Are you trying to rebel? Are you going to be thrown into the 18 levels of hell you've set for yourselves and never be reincarnated? Back down, otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless." Ghostly wails and howls. All the ghost officials in Qingguang Hall laughed wildly. In the midst of their laughter, each of them took out their own weapons. The judge's brush, the morning staff of the black and white impermanence, the steel fork of Oxhead and Horseface, and the chains of the ghost soldiers below. King Chakravarti swung his halberd. "How dare you? Do you really think that our hell is ignorant and can't differentiate between the real and the fake? Do you think that any random person who comes down here can pretend to be a deity? We originally respected your ability. Since you're able to come down to hell, you must be a cultivator of the mortal world. In line with the principle of having nothing to do with each other, we shouldn't go too far. We should just pretend that we didn't know anything and fulfill your wishes. But I didn't expect that you two dog heads are insatiable. You actually want to interfere with the operation of hell and take away everyone's livelihood. If this can be tolerated, what else can we tolerate? Since that's the case, let's have a fight. We'd like to see how capable a cultivator of the mortal world is after coming to hell. Chapter 2382. The ghost officials surged forward, vowing to kill these two daring bastards. Lu Xiaoyi took a step forward and swung his golden truncheon down, colliding with the pitchfork of one of the ox-headed officials. He only felt a strong surge of brute force. Even though he had experienced hundreds of battles, he still found it hard to resist. However, he was still experienced and didn't use brute force. The golden truncheon spun and sealed the pitchfork outside. He raised his leg and kicked the ox-headed official, sending him flying and crashing heavily into the palace wall. He didn't seem to be hurt. He shook his head and stood up again. An ominous glint flashed in his eyes, and he pounced forward again with his pitchfork. Lu Xiaoyi's heart sank. He knew he was in trouble. In a special place like the Netherworld, where his abilities were sealed, the gap between him and these ghost officials wasn't as big as he imagined. Of course, this had a lot to do with the fact that he wasn't holding a real sword. In theory, whether or not he was holding a sword shouldn't have any effect on him. However, the problem was that the quality of this golden truncheon was too good. It was a bit too heavy. It was so heavy that his sealed body couldn't handle it very well. The golden truncheon wasn't the best weapon for these ghost bodies in the Netherworld. Everything was abnormal. If the golden truncheon could retain its original properties, it wouldn't even need to be wielded against the ghost body. Just the layer of light from the truncheon would be enough to make the ghost body vanish into thin air. But now, it was just a slightly heavier metal truncheon. The Golden Immortal's restrictions weren't only for people, but also for objects. The ox-headed official was already so difficult to deal with. There were at least hundreds of ghost officials here who were similar to the ox-headed official. Among them, there were many whose positions were higher than the ox-headed official and the horse-faced official. The golden truncheon flipped, sending a few ghost officials flying. His judgment was very clear. He shouted at Daoistsen, "If you don't leave now, you can only stay here as a ghost for the rest of your life." He didn't care whether Daoistsen would listen to him or not. He jumped onto the deer carriage, shook the reins, and ran. He felt the carriage sink. It was definitely Daoistsen, but it couldn't be the Reapers because they didn't have any weight. The deer carriage wasn't fast, especially for someone like Lu Xiaoyi. It was as slow as a snail. However, speed was relative. It was better to be faster than the Reapers. He waved the golden mace and swept away the obstacles in front of him. Firstly, his ability was indeed impressive. Secondly, it seemed that the Reapers were not using their full strength. When the deer carriage started moving, the ghostly wails behind them slowly stopped and gradually faded away. They began to go in circles in the huge underworld of the underworld. Daoistsen was very dissatisfied. "Bailey, you're not very good at being a strong man." He actually ran faster than the main character. Moreover, I didn't think that the famous #1 sword of the Origin world would be so battered and exhausted when dealing with these weaklings. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. "I did run a little fast, I admit. But old son, you didn't say anything first. The moment you came up, you had the intention to destroy the entire Ghost Envoy residence. Isn't this too unkind? It's fine if you don't greet me, but you're also ridiculously wrong about the strength of the ghost servants here. Tell me, how do you explain this?" Daoistsen was rendered speechless. The sword cultivator saw through his intentions with a single glance. His so-called terms were proper, overbearing terms. They were not for negotiation at all, but to find a way to destroy the sect. How could he not know that there was no room for negotiation? Therefore, he could only find an excuse to let the Reapers make the first move. Then, he and the swordsman would take the opportunity to exterminate these arrogant reapers. The only way to solve this problem was to establish a new bureaucratic system in the underworld. He didn't say this out loud because he was worried that the swordsman wouldn't be willing to kill him. This was a plan that he had thought of long ago. If he found too many people, he would get a share of his merit. Therefore, it was best to find someone who could solve this problem alone. But now, it seemed that the strength of these reapers was completely different from the last time he came to the underworld. After 3 days of separation, he had to look at them with new eyes. He scratched his head. I wonder what happened. These things in the underworld seem to be a lot stronger than before. The worst thing is that they seem to have become smarter. They were able to tell that my identity was fake with a single glance. This definitely wasn't a problem with their eyesight. Someone must have been reporting to them about the situation outside, including the immortal court's indifferent attitude towards the underworld. This isn't easy to handle. Knowing that the underworld will change in the future, how can we make them abide by the rules? Lu Xiaoyi didn't say anything. He only focused on controlling the deer carriage. Since Daoists didn't get a response, he could only talk to himself. There's a limit to the number of times we can enter the underworld. The teleportation ability of the Netherworld portal is limited, and we can't bring too many people in. The problem now is that we can't intimidate them in terms of strength. In terms of planning, it's hard for us to come up with a perfect plan. I'm afraid that this trip to the underworld is a bit reckless. Lu Xiaoyi said indifferently. It's you, not us. Daoists smiled bitterly. I didn't tell you in advance because I thought that it would be an easy task. Who knew that these things' strength would increase by leaps and bounds after a few thousand years? Could it be that the changes in the universe before the end of the era have affected this place? Or is there someone behind this? If someone is doing this on purpose, what's their goal? Seeing that Lu Xiaoyi was still hanging high in the air, Daoists couldn't help but ask him, Inspector, if you change to a sword, how many of these ghost envoys can you deal with? Lu Xiaoyi didn't bother with him. He answered seriously, I can slaughter all of them within 100. I can't control them outside of 100. Daoist was somewhat moved. If he were to join in, he could deal with 20 or 30 ghost envoys without a problem. Then, if he were to divide the ghost envoys into groups, it wouldn't be impossible for him to succeed. However, he also knew that this was already a bit beyond the main point of the two of them working together. If in the end, the swordsman still took the lion's share of the merit, he would be a bit unwilling. This swordsman was very strange. No matter who it was, as long as they cooperated with him, he would take away the majority of the benefits in the end. Moreover, he would be the one in charge of the process. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't think of a better way. No matter how the swordsman divided the merit, it would still be less than pulling in a group of people. There was no good way to choose the lesser of two evils. In this world where the fist was the most powerful, this was a law that couldn't be changed even in the underworld. Inspector, you're not saying anything. Are you blaming me for not telling you in advance and wanting to take all the credit for yourself? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Old Sin, our cooperation has a master and a subordinate. In the fifth ring, I was the master and you were the subordinate. Now, in the underworld, you should be the master and I should be the subordinate. This is the way to cooperate. What do you want me to say? If what I say doesn't make sense, then it's the same as not saying anything. If what I say makes sense and you accept it, then it will share your merit. It's because I understand this principle and for the sake of our future cooperation that I can't say anything. Chapter 2383. Daoistson was speechless. Swordsman's words were very clear. Either everyone would depend on their own abilities to see how much merit they contributed, or Daoistson would be the main character and Swordsman would only be a supporting character. The problem was that he couldn't bear the responsibility of being the main character. This was the crux of the problem. He was also a decisive person, so he made up his mind after a slight hesitation. Things had already come to this point, so it was impossible for him to take the majority of the merit for himself. This wasn't a matter of whether he wanted to or not, but a matter of his own ability. Fine. I've stayed in the immortal court for too long, so I don't know how to deal with the ghosts of the mortal world. All these years, I've been mingling in the cultivation world of the origin world, thinking about how to establish my Tao, but I don't have the true state of mind of a mortal cultivator. How about this? You can say whatever you want, and I'll be the one in the end. As for how to distribute the merit after this, I'll leave it to heaven's will. What do you think? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. He really didn't want to fight for anything. With the great karma of the Heaven's Choice continent in the future, why would he care about this little bit of merit? However, Taoist Sin was an immortal, so he couldn't compare to him in certain aspects. For example, his insight, his familiarity with the history of cultivation, and the use of various techniques. An immortal's insight was on a completely different level from his. However, Taoist Sin was unlucky. He placed himself in such a special environment, so all his strengths were useless. On the contrary, his ability to mingle in the mortal world was more important here. But Taoist Sin had never experienced this in the immortal court. After being banished to the lower realm, he was busy trying to crawl back to the immortal court, so how could he travel in the mortal world again? Therefore, his plan seemed to be an armchair strategist and unrealistic. I have a question. Can the two of us really kill those ghost envoys in the underworld? Taoist Sin was startled, but he immediately understood. However, he still refused to admit it. So we can kill them. Lu Xiaoyi didn't show any mercy. You were an immortal before, but not anymore. Let's not talk about how awesome you were in the past, okay? Neither of us can do it now. It's not a matter of strength, but a matter of rules. I've already tried it in the battle, just now. I can temporarily destroy them, but they will immediately revive in the underworld because they belong here. This is their resurrection pool. Not only the ghost officers and ghost envoys, but also those weak, ownerless souls. Even if they were so weak that a fart could destroy them, we still wouldn't be able to kill them. You have the experience of an immortal, so you can judge for yourself whether I'm right or not. Taoists couldn't help but admit that the swordsman's words made a lot of sense. In terms of combat intuition, he was far inferior to the swordsman. Of course, this was also why he had insisted on bringing him along. If they couldn't kill him, it meant that their massacre was useless and meaningless. Taoists suddenly realized that his so-called plan had fallen into a dead end. Once this swordsman opened his mouth, countless verbal cannons would come pouring in. Oldson, how did you make the plan? We don't know the enemy situation, we don't know the reason, and we don't know the principles. After thousands of years, we came up with such a stupid idea. This idea must have been learned from a novel, right? Do you dare to believe the words of those wretched literati? You're lucky you met me. If it were anyone else, you might not even be able to leave the underworld alive. Taoist Sin's embarrassment turned into anger. What do you mean by thousands of years of planning? I've been working on my great Tao for thousands of years. Recently, I've succeeded in my great Tao. Only then did I remember that I should work on my merits. Only then did I remember about the 5 rings in the underworld. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly understood. So you're just cramming at the last minute. You don't usually burn incense. If I'd known your plan was like this, I wouldn't have come with you to waste time. If I had the time, wouldn't it have been better for me to spend it in the sword Tao steel? Taoist Sin felt like he had nothing left to lose. Stop being so eccentric. You came here because you thought you could take advantage of it, didn't you? Do you really think you're a saint? Now that I've split the initiative, you're still not satisfied? What's with all this nonsense? Do you have a plan or not? If not, we'll all go home. You didn't help us this time. Lu Xiaoyi laughed heartily. See, I said what's on my mind after being provoked. Forget it. We're all acquaintances, so I won't go too far. I'll say the ugly words first. Once I come up with this idea, I'm afraid we won't be able to split the merits evenly. I'm afraid I'll take the lion's share. I, Lu Xiaoyi, am an honest man who doesn't do underhanded things. I'll tell you the result first. I'm not trying to take advantage of you. Oldson, if you think the merits here are important to you, then there's no need to rush to solve this matter. You can think about it slowly after we leave, or you can find a companion who won't steal your merits. I won't say anything either way. Who told me? Escort Lu, to be known throughout the world. Taoist Sin was really in a difficult position. He really needed to make some contributions in order to offset the bad impression he had of the heavenly Tao due to disobeying the immortal court's orders. Therefore, he really didn't want to give this guy too much of his merits. However, even if he couldn't think of a solution now, could he think of one after he left? It was best to cut the Gordian knot when it came to matters like this. The longer he delayed, the easier it would be for something unforeseen to happen, especially before the end of the era, when the universe was changing faster and faster. Who knew what kind of demons would appear in the underworld in a few more decades? Find a companion? Perhaps it wouldn't be as big of a threat as this swordsman, but what if it was a piece of trash? If he couldn't do it, what was the point of talking about splitting the merits? He looked at Lu Xiaoyi with a burning gaze. You said that you still have a big matter that can obtain the will of the heavens? If you promise me that you won't drag me down with you, then I'll leave the matter of the underworld to you. Lu Xiaoyi laughed inwardly. It was really hard for this has been immortal. In order to climb back up, he had to work so hard that it made one's heart ache. Unfortunately, his misfortune was that he met Lu Xiaoyi. All right. Old Sin, you were once an immortal. How can you be so petty? I promise you that when we're done with this matter, I won't forget about you for the next big matter. So, have you made your decision? Daoists didn't know how he was forced to this point. When Yi Zhantian saw this swordsman, he felt that it wouldn't be hard to deal with him based on his past experience. However, when he really came into contact with him, he realized that he was a true demon that couldn't be touched. It was a pity that he understood it a little too late. Just say it. I, Beizong, Immortal Lord, was a famous person in the Immortal Court. Don't tell me that I would go back on my word. Furthermore, this matter is left to the heavenly Tao to decide. No one can control it. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and nodded. We indeed can't kill those ghost officials and ghost envoys. But even if we can't kill them, there are some here that can be killed. For example, those ownerless souls that have been oppressed for a long time. Chapter 2384. Daoist's eyes lit up. After all, he wasn't stupid. How could anyone who could become an immortal be a fool? I understand now. Bewitch those soulless souls at the bottom to rebel. They're all souls, so if they have a grudge against each other, they can devour each other. One soul, one mouth. With us keeping them in check, it shouldn't be too difficult. We can also find those who are willing to listen to us and let them take the position. It's really killing two birds with one stone. Killing two birds with one stone. Brilliant. It's really brilliant. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't help but pour cold water on him. Old Sin, don't think about it too simply. Instigating a rebellion isn't a simple matter, especially when submitting to adversity has become a habit. It requires a lot of time, and you also need to find the right target. In addition, how to devour the foundation of the bureaucracy step by step is also a very difficult tactical problem. Finally, I don't object to your idea of finding a spokesperson among those who came later. We can't stay here forever, so we'll have to find a spokesperson eventually. But that's even more difficult. To the human heart, even if he performed well during the rebellion, what would happen if he were to sit in that position is a completely different matter. It's not that simple. Daoist Sin quickly calculated in his mind. To tell the truth, he originally thought that swordsman's idea might not be that good, so he decided to drag it out first. But who knew that Lu Xiaoyi would immediately block his path of retreat? He immediately realized that this might be the best way, and also the only way, compared to immortals like them. Those who had experienced life in the mortal world were indeed different. How will we choose the next leader of hell? That's still a long way off, so let's not think about it for now. Let's do what we can do first. How about this, Inspector C? Don't blame me for taking the credit. Let's divide the work between us. I'll be in charge of instigating the gathering, and you'll be in charge of the specific tactical arrangements. Once we've gotten rid of these people, we'll discuss the future of hell in detail. What do you think? Lu Xiaoyi nodded with a smile. He was well aware of the reason behind Daoist Sin's suggestion. Daoist Sin wanted to accomplish certain things independently, not under his guidance. This was a cultivator's persistence and pride, so he should understand and not fuss over minor matters. In fact, he didn't mind letting Taoists do whatever he wanted, but he still believed in himself more when it came to fighting. When it came to battles and his life was at stake, he would not listen to anyone's advice. This was a quality that an outstanding swordsman must have. Now that the plan had been decided, they went their separate ways. Taoists then began to approach the ownerless souls who had been oppressed. Lu Xiaoyi was too lazy to ask him what methods he had up his sleeves. Presumably, his experience as an immortal and his multiple visits to the underworld would give him some experience. Lu Xiaoyi's target was none other than the ghost officers of the 10 Kings of Hell. The exact number of people in each palace, distribution, their stress response to provocation, desire for battle, and their fighting ability in the underworld. Because these ghost officers have been managing the souls for a long time, they have formed a deep connection with the underworld's yin energy. Over a long period of time, they had gradually transformed this connection into strength. This was why they were so strong and completely different from other souls. For the majority of souls, they wouldn't stay in the underworld for long. Otherwise, the underworld would be overcrowded sooner or later. The number of living souls that entered the underworld would have to be reincarnated in order to maintain a certain balance. If they couldn't stay in the underworld for long, they wouldn't be able to enjoy the opportunity to strengthen their soul for too long. The dense underworld yin energy in the underworld wouldn't be able to nourish them to the point where they could challenge the ghost officers and ghost officers. Those who were slightly stronger would be consciously sent away by the 10 Kings of Hell for the sake of their stability. Of course, this was also the reason why the Immortals had designed this system in the beginning. They had to have a certain level of ability for the managers. Otherwise, how could they manage those rebellious souls? It was both simple and difficult to understand all of this. The difficult part was that most of the living souls didn't know anything. Some really didn't know anything, while others didn't dare to say anything. The simple part was that the number of living souls managed here was more than 100 million. There were only less than 1,000 ghost officers and ghost officers. On average, there might only be one manager in the tens of thousands of living souls. This was a huge loophole. The ghost officers couldn't even recognize all the living souls under them. This was because most of their energy was focused on the 18 levels of hell. In addition, some old men didn't work. This made it possible for 2 people to infiltrate. There would always be those who had rebellious thoughts. Originally, it was a matter of divine sense, but now it had returned to the most primitive state of investigation. This was very troublesome, but Lu Xiaoyi enjoyed it. He suddenly realized the meaning of doing these things in the underworld. Theory practice. Therefore, among the 3 newly created subversive great Daos, the reason why he was the most familiar with devouring was because of his experience in the cave. By the same logic, no matter how deep his understanding of reincarnation was, no matter how many hints he received from Hong Mao, to a great Tao that emphasized system construction, practical experience was extremely important. What was written on paper was ultimately shallow. How could something that hadn't been proven through practice be able to overtake the old order and rise to the top of the innate great Tao that had been operating normally for millions of years? Reincarnation, this kind of experience was very difficult to put into practice. To an individual cultivator, it was impossible to find the most correct answer through reincarnation. In the normal course of the universe, this should be something that was completed through generations of relays. But now, he could only compress this process into a short 1 to 2,000 years. The underworld was the best place to experiment with his new great Tao of reincarnation. With this understanding, Lu Xiaoyi was filled with enthusiasm. He once again realized how naive he was to pin his hopes on others to complete these 3 great Taos. It could only be used as a smokescreen. No one had the foundation that he had in the 3 subversive great Taos. Firstly, it was the deep accumulation of virtue. Secondly, it was his unique practical experience. During this process, he also discovered the chronic and irreversible problems of the underworld's bureaucratic system. These living souls were all mortals, and they did not have the same level of cognition as cultivators. Therefore, all of their thinking started from the mortal world, and all aspects were filled with the influence of the mortal world's imperial court. How long could a mortal government last? Without the support of the cultivators, it wouldn't last more than 1,000 years. It would inevitably slide from the peak of the new dynasty to the decline. This was the chronic problem of the current dynasty system. It was an internal objective law that no one could change. If the mortal dynasty was like this, then there was no need to mention the underworld. This place had been operating for hundreds of thousands of years. One could imagine how broken the system was. All the problems of the mortal dynasty's end were present here. There were also countless problems that were unique to this place. The underworld still existed only because the environment here didn't seem to need to consider the problems of the people's livelihood. They didn't have to worry about food and clothing. In addition, as time passed, the Reaper's individual strength became stronger and stronger. Just from the system alone, it was already riddled with holes. All it lacked was a suitable opportunity. Chapter 2385. In this system, the most fatal thing was their outdated and inflexible ideas, which made them have no sense of crisis at all. Even though Daoists' actions had crossed their bottom line, they didn't realize the destruction these two humans could bring because they believed that the immortal court would make the final decision. In their eyes, they were just two arrogant human cultivators. Did they think they could save the world just because they learned some skills? Childish. This gave Lu Xiaoyi an opportunity to plan his tactics. A month later, the two met sneakily. Daoistin was a bit tired. He felt that this was even more tiring than studying the great Tao. With this kind of body and this kind of strength, his lips were about to blister. Most importantly, the people he was persuading weren't normal. I can gather about 10,000 souls now. The more time passes, the more souls I'll gather. But I can't guarantee that they won't spill the beans. There are traitors everywhere in this damn place. I feel like I won't be able to wrap up the fire if I drag this out. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. That's normal. Snitching is also a way to change the state of life. It's simple, easy, and doesn't take any risks. If I were a soul, I would have already sued you for inciting rebellion and conspiring against the law. Daoists shouted, "Stop making sarcastic remarks here. Do you have any confidence if we act now?" Lu Xiaoyi said indifferently, "I don't have confidence, but that's not a reason to not act. 10,000 souls isn't a small number. The key is to form a momentum. Once the momentum is formed, the snowball will roll bigger and bigger, and gathering souls will be easy." Daoists nodded. This guy didn't pull his crotch. I think so too. Words alone are useless. It's better to act. We'll set up a banner and build momentum. That's what we do. Have you decided where to start? Lu Xiaoyi pointed into the distance. The reincarnation hall. It's the closest to the world of the living and the furthest from the other halls. Daoists glared. Don't tell me we're just going to push from one hall to the next. If it's that simple, can't we have an ingenious tactical arrangement? Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Oldson, you've read too many books. The simplest method was also the most effective. Moreover, do you think that to these living souls, the so-called battle tactics have any meaning? My method may seem clumsy, but there's nothing wrong with the core idea. Ants can kill an elephant if there are enough of them. That's the human wave tactic. It's a swarm of bees. The battle would begin with a few of the lowest-ranked emissaries of hell. They didn't have the 10,000 souls that Daoists had bragged about. There were only 1,000 or 2,000 of them. Daoists didn't blush in the slightest because of his bragging. In war, wasn't it normal for 1,000 people to be called an army of 10,000? It was already very kind of him not to mention the 100,000 troops. If it were 200 years ago, this place would be filled with the top evildoers and good people. It would be easy to instigate them. But it's different now. Those unruly evildoers and good people have all reincarnated. Now, Everyone here is basically an ordinary person. So, after the collapse of the 5 fates and 5 virtues, the great Tao of reincarnation no longer had a basis to rely on. Unable to see the light of virtue above the living souls' heads, the great Tao of reincarnation became blind. So now, for the past 200 years, ordinary people were used to make up the numbers. The immortal court also let this go. They couldn't even take care of themselves. So who would worry about these departed souls? Lu Xiaoyi's view was the exact opposite of his. I think this is the best. What you care about is how to fight, but what I care about is how to build the underworld in the future. Ordinary people are good. They're much easier to manage than those so-called good and evil people. Moreover, don't worry. When it comes to a real battle, ordinary people with simple minds are much stronger than those scheming evildoers and good people. Surrounded by so many living souls, the emissaries of hell weren't worried at all. With their own strength, these weak souls couldn't do anything to them at all. But they didn't know that there were 2 evil wolves hiding among these flocks of sheep. The living souls dilly-dallied there, overcautious and overcautious. They were very clear about the outcome if they failed. They would be thrown into the 18 levels of hell for the next 100 years and experience those inhuman torments. Although they wouldn't die, the pain wouldn't be any less. It was an enormous torment to the mind. The ones who started the fight could only be the 2 instigators. Lu Xiaoyi pulled out his long sword, while Daoist Sin used a magic sword. The 2 of them chopped up the emissaries of hell like they were chopping vegetables. They were really hovering between life and death, because souls like them simply couldn't die in an environment like the underworld. This was the rule set by the Golden Immortal when he established this place. It was the rule of the underworld. You could torture them, but you couldn't kill them. Dying was easy, but to live, there was a process. This slow recovery process was the opportunity for the living souls to take a bite. In the beginning, no one dared to approach, but then a few daring souls surrounded and bit them. What they bit off was the yin qi that these emissaries of hell had accumulated over tens of thousands of years. With the beginning, what followed was very simple. When 1,000 or 2,000 living souls started a bite, the emissaries of hell hadn't been able to hover between life and death a few times before they were bitten until the yin qi they had accumulated over tens of thousands of years was completely gone. They truly returned to the state of primitive living souls when they first entered this place. At this time, the other living souls could no longer bite off anything from their bodies. The emissaries of hell didn't die, because this was the rule, but they also lost the capital to do evil because the ability that they had painstakingly accumulated over tens of thousands of years was no longer there. The living souls who had tasted the sweetness were somewhat excited because they felt that their own strength had increased. In this place, increasing one's strength meant that one wouldn't be bullied or even bullied others. The team had increased by another 1,000. It was a bit of scale. Daoist Sin was very satisfied. This was a pretty good start. Find a few more emissaries of hell. 10 or so will do. After a few more times, the team will expand like a snowball. Lu Xiaoyi spread out his hands. You wish. How can there be so many lone emissaries for you to slowly grow stronger? They are emissaries of hell, not idiots. Let's directly go to the reincarnation hall. We'll work a little harder. A hall with 100 or so emissaries of hell. We should be able to take them down, right? The team was majestic, but the living soul's morale wasn't high. After all, ever since they had been pulled into the netherworld, they had viewed this kind of king of hell's palace as a taboo. The huge psychological shadow wasn't so easy to erase. Daoist Sin complained, many will die, although they won't die in the end. But this morale, Lu Xiaoyi didn't hesitate at all. War is to get rid of the weeds and preserve the pure. Only in this kind of life and death situation can you pick out the seeds to manage the netherworld in the future. And we have to be fast. We can't stop. We can't wait for the other king of Hell's palaces to react and gather all the emissaries of Hell's palace. The 2 of us won't be able to hold them off. So, once the battle starts, unless the victor is decided, we can't stop. Chapter 2386. The reincarnation hall was filled with the cries of ghosts and shrieks of souls. Lu Xiaoyi and Daoists stood at the top of the hall. Below them were the living souls cheering in joy. Over 10,000 had already gathered here, and there were still countless more rushing in from outside the hall. The destruction of a hall had given the large number of living souls a way out. Rebellion was the ultimate dream in everyone's heart. If they couldn't do it while they were alive, it wasn't bad to do it once in death. It was simpler than Daoists had imagined. It's actually that easy? Lu Xiaoyi shrugged. As long as we find the right method, it's originally very easy. Next, we just need to sneak into the crowd of living souls and launch sneak attacks. We don't need to do too much. With the numbers, everything will be natural. The way the netherworld exists is the most prone to a gathering of souls, but the system of the underworld completely didn't consider this aspect of dealing with it. Of course, external factors are the most important. If it weren't for us, those living souls wouldn't have been able to bite those ghost envoys. He pointed at a certain place. What's up with those ghost envoys over there? In a corner of the reincarnation hall, there were a few ghost envoys looking at the chaotic scene in front of them as if nothing had happened. What was strange was that a large number of living souls passed by them, but none of them were able to harm them. Even Lu Xiaoyi seemed to have killed them a few times. But why were these ghost envoys still so strong after being killed? Just now, there were too many living souls and the scene was too chaotic to see clearly. But now that the situation was settled, it highlighted that these ghost envoys were different from the rest. Daoists explained, one of the reasons why living souls can swallow the power of ghost envoys is because we need to kill them so that they will be in a weakened state when they are reborn. But there's another very important point, and that is that the living souls have been wronged by them. They have been tortured by these ghost envoys in the 18 layers of hell. This is actually the source of the living soul's power. The reason why these ghost envoys are still fine is that they don't have karma towards these ordinary living souls and have never mistreated them. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly understood. We came without any warning. If they can still avoid karma like this, then the self-restraint of these ghost envoys must be very impressive. To be able to persist for tens of thousands of years and still be able to do this, even saints can't do it, right? But what I'm curious about is how the decadent system of hell could possibly tolerate an anomaly like them. Daoists smiled. Indeed, it's intolerable. But if they're fair enough, if they can judge things based on their past lives instead of their own likes and dislikes, then they won't be affected by karma even if they torture them in the same way. In other words, not only did they have the perseverance, they also had the ability. They are all the worst evildoers and the greatest good people. Many of these people are capable. You have to admit that. Of course, Lu Xiaoyi admitted it. However, he had a second question. The Chakravarti king is missing. Where'd he go? Daoist snorted. We have a division of labor, okay? I'll be in charge of agitation, and you'll be in charge of tactics. Now that we've defeated the enemy and the commander has disappeared, you're asking me? Lu Xiaoyi couldn't be bothered to argue with him. Raise the troops and move out. The loss of a major target was an anomaly for him. From the previous few battles, he could clearly feel that the strength of these ghost officials was proportional to their status. For example, Oxhead and Horseface were much higher than ordinary ghost officials. The black and white impermanents were also much higher than Oxhead and Horseface. Judges were obviously much higher than the black and white impermanents. Then, what kind of strength would the Yama Kings of the 10 Palaces be? He had encountered the judge of the Chakravarti Palace before. He was a very powerful expert. He was already very surprised that he couldn't even take down the judge of the Chakravarti King. However, when he thought about how the other party had been playing with the judge's pen for at least tens of thousands of years, it didn't seem impossible. If status was really proportional to strength, then he had to be careful of 10 Yama Kings gathered together. Therefore, he had to speed up. Once the curtains were drawn, he couldn't stop. Hoping that these living souls would have any kind of conviction was tantamount to a fool's dream. This was a one-time deal. If it failed, it would take him decades to recover. How could he have so much time to waste here? The next target was the Hall of Equality. There was no need for tactics. Tens of thousands of living souls surged over and instantly surrounded the Hall of Equality. In terms of strength, these living souls weren't worth mentioning. The weakest little ghost officials in the Hall of Equality could beat them up with a wave of their hand. However, there was a limit to the number of ghost officials. Amidst the flying living souls, the two wretched humans mixed in with them. Then, the ghost officials who had begun to reform their souls howled miserably amidst the endless biting. The power that they had painstakingly accumulated over hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years was eaten up by the living souls. This was their fighting style. Entanglement, densely packed without end. Then, they would wait for the two humans to succeed in their sneak attack. Of course, they still didn't know the true identity of these two humans. They thought that they were two of their kind who had awakened on their own and were exceptionally powerful. The living souls served them as their masters. However, they didn't consider what new harsh laws awaited them after they overthrew the system of the underworld. Let's have a good time first. This was the strength of a group. Any rules and laws weren't worth mentioning in front of such numbers. The law doesn't punish the masses. This wasn't a lie. In the mortal world, this kind of tactic wouldn't be possible. This was because you had to consider too many things. Soldiers, provisions, people's food, troops' formation, morale's organization. However, these things weren't needed here. The living souls didn't eat, drink, poop, or sleep. They could be killed with a howl. The key point was that they weren't afraid of death, because they were already dead. At most, they would die again. The same surprise attack, the same result. There were no deaths. It was just that there was one less group of officials who abused their power. There was another group of living souls who struggled at the bottom. Of course, there were a few ghost officials who were still standing. They were the most unique group of people in the underworld. They had great wisdom and perseverance. They had held on until now for tens of thousands of years. Finally, they had waited for a chance to change their fate. Therefore, they only watched and observed quietly. They wanted to see what the purpose of these two strange creatures was. What was their route? They killed even more cleanly than in the reincarnation hall. In terms of numbers, they were unstoppable. However, the King of Equality wasn't here. For the time being, they didn't have the chance to deal with the surviving ghost officials. Lu Xiaoyi's face was filled with worry. Old Sin, I'm afraid that those so-called kings have already foreseen our actions. It's understandable that the King of Chakravarti is here. However, now that the King of Equality isn't here, it's definitely not a coincidence. I dare say that we still won't be able to stop a single King of Hell in the next Yamahal. Sindao's expression was solemn. What do you mean? Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. I'm just reminding you. I don't mean it. Other than continuing, what other choice do we have? I just want to tell you that if you don't want to give up, then be prepared to fight to the death. Chapter 2387. Like a hot knife through butter, this was how they felt during their rebellion. The number of living souls had also increased from 1 to 2,000 to over 1,000,000 now. Of course, it couldn't be compared to the hundreds of millions of living souls in the underworld. But if you exclude those imprisoned in the 18 levels of hell, women, the elderly, children, and those who were timid, this number was normal. In such a short period of time, this was already a remarkable achievement. More importantly, it was enough to deal with the Yama Palace. Soon, they arrived at the last hall, Qingguang Palace. Daoist's brows furrowed tighter and tighter. There's something fishy about this. None of the 10 Yama Kings are missing, but the other ghost envoys in the palace are all present. They're completely unprepared, just like Lu Xiaoyi continued. Just like cannon fodder? I feel the same way, but I'm really not familiar with the underworld. I still don't understand what this means. Old Sin, do the 10 Yama Kings have seals or something like that? For example, some special method to control the underworld? Taoist Sin was also very confused. There should be, right? However, this place was a place where a special power was sealed by a gold immortal. So, what kind of tricks could he play? I haven't done anything specific. To be honest, I'm not too sure. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Not sure? You dare to drag me here if you're not sure? At the very least, we have to snatch some special items to control the underworld, right? Now, we've occupied the Tenyama palaces, but it's the same as not occupying them at all. The two of them were actually the same. The entire operation seemed to be too relaxed, because in their eyes, the souls of these mortals were not a threat at all. With the experience of a half-immortal, what kind of tricks could they play? This shouldn't be the character of cultivators. But no matter how cautious they were, they couldn't ask them to be careful with mortals. This was something rooted in the depths of every cultivator's consciousness. There was no way to stop it. A relaxing trip was what both of them were thinking about. Overthrowing the underworld and establishing a new order didn't seem too difficult when the immortal court had basically given up on this place. Their considerations weren't wrong. The immortal court had indeed given up on this place, but they didn't consider the fact that the natives here, even if they were the souls of mortals after death, still possessed the same intelligence. They knew about risks, schemes, and tricks. Taoist Sin comforted him. It's nothing. The immortal court had indeed given up on this place. This was confirmed by my contacts with the higher-ups over the years. The 5 fates and 5 virtues had been lost, and there was no foundation to reconstruct the complete cycle of reincarnation. Rather than spending a lot of effort here, it was better to wait until the new era came. What other risks were there? The souls themselves? Or was it some other foreign cultivator? If it's these two things, I believe it won't be difficult for us to deal with them with our abilities. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. I hope so. This Taoist's ability to strategize really wasn't that great, but he couldn't complain right now. Now that things had come to this, it wasn't in his character to retreat. He could only deal with whatever came his way. Soon, Qin Guanghao also fell into chaos. The two of them didn't make much of a move, but Qin Guanghao's ghost officials and ghost soldiers fell into a sea of living souls. Now, some of the living souls were no longer weak. After devouring so many ghost soldiers' strength, many of them had become stronger. Although they were still far from the level of those ghost soldiers, they could still cause harm to the ghost soldiers with their numbers. Taoist Sin was still among them, helping the living souls deal with the most troublesome ghost officials. However, Lu Xiaoyi came in front of another group of ghost soldiers. This was the group that didn't wallow in evil, the clear stream that had persisted for tens of thousands of years. There were also dozens of them, among which were the judges, black and white impermanence, Oxhead, and Horseface. They were quietly watching from afar. Lu Xiaoyi directly revealed his trump card to them. You must be wondering where the two of us came from. Maybe you already have the direction of your guesses. Then I can tell you now. That's right, we are cultivators from the world of the living. We came here with a purpose. When he advised people, he was always frank and straightforward. He openly stated his purpose, striving to achieve a win-win situation. He believed that this was the fastest way to gain the other party's trust, and not to paint a big picture or threaten. We want to help you break away from this dark life in the underworld. This isn't entirely for you, but also for us to obtain merit. Saving a life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. Saving a life may not be able to build a 7-story pagoda, but there may be a 2-story pagoda or even a 3-story pagoda. It's of great use to us cultivators. If we can achieve this goal, it will be beneficial to both of us. But now it seems that your masters still want to struggle on their deathbed. I'm telling you all this because you are different from them. After persevering for so many years, it's time to reap the rewards. The judge had the highest position among the group of ghost soldiers. He said, what are the benefits that Exalted Immortal is talking about? Still holding the pipa and covering half of your face? Lu Xiaoyi said concisely, there are 3 benefits. In terms of the past, if we succeed this time, you can be at ease and do the things that you could only do secretly before. Now that the King Yinluo of Hell has a new master, you can openly promote your own ideals, instead of enduring humiliation and suffering in silence. In terms of the future, if you don't want to stay here anymore, then maybe we can find a way out for you. But I'm not sure now, because those 10 masters are still at large. The judge was very calm. Sorry, before you control the underworld, we can't promise you anything. Moreover, isn't the control of the underworld in the immortal court? Then, if it's a hypothetical, what right do you have to say that you can decide the future of the underworld? Lu Xiaoyi smiled slightly. Then have you thought about why the immortal court has given up on the jurisdiction of the underworld for thousands of years, and no immortal has come down? I can't tell you too much, but there are changes in dynasties in the mortal world, and the same goes for the immortal court. It's just that the changes in the immortal court are not so frequent. You are lucky to be in time for this change. I don't dare to say what will happen, but at least this is an opportunity. Is this what you want to live in this kind of darkness? The judge's expression did not change. With our ability, we may not be able to help you much, Lu Xiaoyi laughed. There's no need. We don't need your help either. I'm just here to tell you that although our actions seem to be disadvantageous to you, you know very well what we're targeting. It's not the souls that have lived for tens of thousands of years, but the system of the underworld. Now that you have proven your independence under this system, you are the best managers of the underworld in the future. The opportunity is right in front of you. Think about it carefully. Chapter 2388. The Battle of Annihilation at Qingguang Palace went on without any mishaps. Not a single one escaped. There were still unkillable ghost soldiers, and King Qingguang was still nowhere to be seen. The living souls flew all over the underworld. After being in the underworld for such a long time, they finally had the right to walk freely without being shackled by an iron chain. They could cry or laugh if they wanted to. At this moment, the atmosphere here was not what the underworld should have. Even the dense underworld energy could not stop the living souls from releasing their enthusiasm. It was also at this moment that the sky suddenly became even darker. From the previous dusky sky, it gradually turned blood red. Finally, it was as if the entire underworld was covered in blood. It was so red that it was glaring and terrifying. This was the bloody resentment accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years in the 18 layers of hell. Once it was released, Lu Xiaoyi and Daoists naturally did not mind. However, those living souls, whether they came to watch the show or obtained a portion of their strength through eating, were unable to withstand the ferocious might of the underworld for hundreds of thousands of years. They scattered in a hubbub. The two of them did not attempt to stop them, because one could not persuade millions of frightened rabbits. They only quietly looked at the blood-red sky. There, 10 indistinct figures were swaying. Not only were the people swaying, there were also 10 great seals. These were the seals that the 10 Yama Kings of the underworld had obtained from immortals. In this special environment, they had a special function. The sinkhole-like underworld suddenly flipped over, wrapping all the souls inside, including the two audacious cultivators. However, the two of them could not see those souls here. In their senses, it was as if the entire underworld only had the two of them and the 10 Yama Kings. In the eyes of mortals, this kind of momentum would have scared them witless and helpless. However, who were the two of them? They were former immortals with millions of years of cultivation experience. They were people who had passed through caves. There was nothing in this universe that could make them feel afraid. There was only curiosity, an unending thirst for knowledge. The 10 great seals of the underworld represent 10 different underworlds. To break them, I'm afraid we can only break through them one by one. Why don't we have a bet? Let's see who can break the most. The loser has to promise the other one thing. Lu Xiaoyi was never afraid of gambling with others. Ever since he started cultivating, he had never lost a bet. The two of them clapped their hands. King Qingguang's hearty laughter came from the sky. Many thanks to the two of you for getting rid of these traitors for us. In order to thank the two of you for your great kindness, We've set up the 10 purgatory arrays here as a reward for the two of you working so hard to overthrow hell. Don't you want to seize control of hell? The Dark Seal is right here. If you have the ability, come and take it. Lu Xiaoyi and Daoistsen glanced at each other. Then Daoistsen said, "Something seems off. Did someone get here before us?" Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. "I can't tell. Even if someone did come, would they be among the 10 Yama Kings, or would they be hiding somewhere else? Who cares? Let's get rid of these 10 Yama Kings first. Oldson, only one person can go with each seal. Take care of yourself. Don't say, I didn't help you." Daoistsen sneered. "You should take care of yourself. Do you really think that I've been an immortal for 1,000,000 years for nothing? Do you think I'll fall into the hands of these wandering souls? Half-immortals had the pride of half-immortals. How could they shrink back in the face of the threat of these mortal souls? These kings of hell were just relying on the seal of hell bestowed by the immortals to borrow some of the chi of the netherworld. They thought that they could fight for life and death here. This was the thinking of mortals. They would never understand the limits of cultivators. Cultivators and half-immortals were trapped by mortal souls using arrays. Who would believe this? This was the current situation of the two of them. Qin Guang's seal, Chu Jiang's seal, Emperor Song's seal, Wu Guan's seal, King Yinluo's seal, Equality seal, Mount Tai seal, Metropolis seal, Border City seal, and Reincarnation seal. 10 large seals spun around in the sky. They were particularly eye-catching against the blood-red background. There didn't seem to be any order. Lu Xiaoyi floated up and went straight for the Qin Guang seal. Since they were going to fight, he would beat the leader first. Although he knew that in the underworld, there wasn't much difference between the 10 Yama Kings in terms of status. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Daoistsen pounce on the closest reincarnation seal. This was the last thing he saw. In the next moment, he threw himself into the seal. Almost at the same time, he knew that he didn't throw himself into the Qin Guang seal. The 10 dark seals were illusory. What you saw might not be real. Just like when he threw himself into the Qin Guang seal, it was the Chu Jiang seal that went in. Daoistsen threw the reincarnation seal, but he didn't know which seal went in. It didn't matter. In any case, he had to go through them one by one. However, this kind of mistake made him speechless. He had lost his swordsman's great Dao realm and was played by a few mortal souls. It was really embarrassing. He couldn't blame them. Who asked them to come here and walk right into his trap? The Chu Jiang seal specialized in living hell, the ice hell. Once they entered, they would be frozen to the bone. Chapter 2389. He circulated the technique from Shi Zhao's body, and this kind of cold immediately left him. To be honest, compared to the situation in the Phoenix Nest, this place was already considered very warm. However, he still staggered all the way towards King Chu Jiang's location, wanting to run into the attack range of the flying sword. When a swordsman who moved unhindered in the universe lost his long-range attack, approaching became the most difficult thing for him. As for what would happen after he got close, it was actually not important. King Chu Jiang resided in the center of the ice. With a long black chain as the center, the range of his chain attack was within the range of 1,000 feet. It was also within this range that there were thousands upon thousands of densely packed living souls, endlessly circulating between life and death. Lu Xiaoyi carefully sensed and could already faintly feel a trace of Dao power from King Chu Jiang's chain attack. It was still very weak and far from being able to form a battle strength, but this kind of change meant that it was unusual. Within the range of the Golden Immortals restriction, even half-immortals like Lu Xiaoyi and Daoistsen couldn't use half of their Dao state. The seal was firm, but this kind of thing that shouldn't have appeared here could only mean one thing. The netherworld had already begun to show signs of its own Dao will. In other words, the great Dao of reincarnation after the new era leaned towards including mortals into the reincarnation system. This was a very important signal. Coming to the netherworld this time was the right choice. He could clearly feel the pulse of the changes in the era, allowing him to know which direction he should take. The reincarnation system in the mortal world was also a hurdle that couldn't be avoided. And in the reincarnation system in the mortal world, even Hong Mao didn't mention this. He didn't know what the reason was. But there was one thing, like this kind of great Tao system, it was something that was completely based on one's heart. It still had to be created by the Tao fusing cultivators themselves. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind, but he still approached King Chujiang's chain. This guy comprehended a layer of the netherworld Tao will. It could indeed raise his strength qualitatively, but it also meant that there was a way to kill him. The heavenly Tao was fair. If you were only a soul, no matter how strong or weak you were, you wouldn't die in the netherworld. But if you had already broken away from the category of a pure soul, then there would naturally be the rules of the cultivation world to restrict you. You couldn't take advantage of both the mortal soul and the Tao soul. Therefore, even if this guy's performance made him feel pressured, since he could kill him, it was not a problem. As he neared the range of the chain, he felt the power of the black chain. What made it difficult for him was the endless suffering souls along the way. In view of his current situation, other than squeezing through these souls, there seemed to be no better way. Having made up his mind, Zhang Xian turned his body to the side without any hesitation. In an instant, countless hands reached out from the surroundings, as though he was a drowning man making his final struggle. If he were to be caught, it would be troublesome. After all, the strength he exerted before his death was not to be underestimated. There was no pity. He would not put himself in danger just because he was pitiful. Moreover, since these people could endure the pain of being frozen, they would not mind being cut off by his sword, right? Other than these never-ending hands, his attention was mainly on the black chain. Only after he came into direct contact with the power of the black chain could he decide on a suitable attack strategy for himself. The only good news was that King Chujiang could not move because he had to be in this kind of scene of hell. He could only stay in the center of hell and rely on these souls to obstruct the enemy. At the same time, he could also obtain the power of the underworld provided to him by the souls. The black chain arrived like a shadow. Lu Xiaoyi had experience with this kind of weapon. That was on a boat in the dreamland. Therefore, he took advantage of the opportunity to lean his body to the side and block the black chain with his sword 3 feet in front of him, preventing this kind of soft weapon from twisting around him. At the same time, he lunged forward and advanced several feet forward. The method was simple and effective. The only obstacle was those hands that were everywhere. They were very weak, but the strength they exerted before their death was not small. To be precise, this was not an attack, but a subconscious attempt to pull something before their death. This made him very vexed, because this would take up too much energy. He could only let the sword brandish slightly in the surroundings, cutting off every pair of hands that reached over. Sometimes, those hands were only a few inches away from his body. The power of the black chain was very heavy. When it lashed out, it was full of power. However, that was only for those souls. To an expert like him, this kind of chain attack method was inferior to the one he encountered in the dreamland last time. It was just like the old man in the park who was flinging his whip. Power without technique was just a waste of energy. Rushing forward like this, he got closer and closer to the fat King Chujiang. This living king of hell's eyes also revealed a trace of fear. With just a few exchanges of weapons, he already understood the disparity between himself and this foreign cultivator. Therefore, he did not hesitate and let out a shrill howl from his mouth. Under the urging of the chained shadows, thousands upon thousands of souls began to consciously surge towards Lu Xiaoyi. Amidst the surge, they gathered into a human form. Then, under the chain attacks, fragments shot out in all directions. The fragments that shot out in all directions once again gathered into a human. Some of the souls became handicapped without arms or legs. Some of them became 3-legged and 4-armed monsters. Amidst the miserable wails, countless hands reached towards Lu Xiaoyi. Some of the women were screaming at the top of their lungs. Some of the brawny men were glaring and roaring, and the withered arms of the elderly were densely covered in dark spots. Lu Xiaoyi was in hell. Even if his heart was in the light, he still could not break away from all the disturbances before his eyes. The sword light swung into a circle of light, and severed limbs scattered around his body. Such a tragic scene was still unable to divert his attention in the slightest. Trying to use this kind of tragic scene to sway his emotions? That was because he did not know how a half-immortal was cultivated. When the distance was close to 300 feet, Lu Xiaoyi's surroundings were already densely packed with overlapping souls. Merely cutting off the limbs was no longer enough to stop these souls from approaching. This was King Chujiang's strategy. He wanted to see if this cultivator's Tao heart was as firm as the legend said. Even in this kind of situation, his state of mind would not be disturbed. As long as the swordsman showed even the slightest bit of mercy, he would immediately be grabbed by countless hands and tightly hugged into a ball. Then, he would lose his ability to resist and be whipped into two by his black chain. But until now, the swordsman still did not show the slightest bit of weakness. It was as if the ones that fell under his sword were not humans, but cows, horses, cats, and dogs. The long sword transformed into a ball of light. Under the tearing, it was actually even more brutal than the whipping of the black chain. King Chujiang's cheek twitched. He secretly sighed at the determination of these cultivators. But today, this cultivator would definitely die here. There was a sinister smile in his eyes. There was no need for the cultivator to be truly weak. The appearance of these souls was already a part of the battle strategy. The black chain was the strength of King Chujiang's lifetime. After soaking in the underworld aura for more than 100,000 years, his strength had already reached a very terrifying level. At a distance of 300 feet, the black chain was as firm as a spear. A thrust of the spear. At the same time, Lu Xiaoyi heard a loud and clear cry of an infant. Chapter 2390. Lu Xiaoyi saw a skinny baby pouncing towards him. The shriveled body represented that he had died of malnutrition. A pair of clear eyes carried a yearning for life as he reached out his hand towards him. Of course, the baby didn't want to do anything to him. This was just an innocent person who was squeezed over by the surging souls. He was still 100 feet away. Another 100 feet, and he would be able to catch King Chujiang off guard. This was his way of fighting. First, he would confuse the enemy. Then he would make the final decision. His goal was to prevent the other party from using those inexplicable methods. Although he didn't really care, he still felt a trace of threat in the special environment of someone else's territory. The baby was squeezed over, and he couldn't cut it in half with a single slash. This wasn't a matter of being soft-hearted, but a matter of bottom line. A little trouble that was destined to not be a threat. If King Chujiang wanted to use this to create a killing intent for him, then he was thinking too much. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, his left hand scooped up the baby. At the same time, he drew a circle with his long sword to cut off the other souls that were pouncing on him. Following the momentum of the circle, the long sword went towards the black chain. His body's forward momentum didn't change at all. The black chain was as firm as a spear. It collided with Lu Xiaoyi's long sword and created a string of sparks. This wasn't a collision of brute force, but also a mutual exchange of internal energy. It was also at this moment that a few pairs of hands grabbed towards him from behind. He had encountered this kind of situation before. When the long sword was entangled by the black chain, he actually had other methods in his arsenal. For example, he could use his left hand to punch, withdraw his sword, flip it around, and so on. It even included letting these souls grab him. It was just a matter of struggling. This time, he chose to let himself be grabbed by a few pairs of hands. That was because he could immediately seal off the other party when he collided with the black chain. Time was of the essence and couldn't be delayed. Just as the long sword swung out, relying on his rich fighting experience to seal off the black chain that was much stronger than him, he felt a bone-piercing chill from the back of his heart, even without turning his head. That was an instinct bestowed upon him by 3,000 years of fighting experience. Under the instinct, his waist and abdomen twisted forcefully, shifting the dislocation of his bones and tendons. His muscles instantly bulged like steel. However, this wave of cold energy was really too close. Because he had long gotten used to the harassment of those living souls' hands, this bit of distance really wasn't enough for him to make a complete response. Because of his quick reflexes, the sharp weapon didn't pierce his back, but it still pierced his internal organs. A dignified half-immortal, the #1 sword in the universe that struck fear into the hearts of all opponents in the cultivation world, was actually stabbed by a mortal. Who would believe this? But it was happening right in front of his eyes. The wound was very deep, but this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that the netherworld chi that belonged exclusively to the netherworld was a great supplement to living souls. But to living people, it was a liver-destroying poison. But Lu Xiaoyi's reaction was different from what King Chu Jiang had imagined. This human cultivator didn't panic, didn't explode with rage, didn't heal his injuries, and didn't even turn around to look. The soul of the infant in his hand was clearly a part of the plan. It was not torn to shreds in his rage. Instead, it was gently pushed aside. It was as if nothing had happened. The distance was already close to 60 meters when the human suddenly charged forward. It was completely different from the state where he was frozen stiff by the cold energy earlier. The living souls were simply unable to keep up with the human speed. The dense area that was formed from surrounding and pouncing on the human was now in a mess because the human suddenly broke away. There were very few living souls in front of him, and they were no longer able to effectively slow him down. When had King Chu Jiang encountered such an abnormal opponent in these hundreds of thousands of years? His black chain was also unable to turn back for a moment because it was too long. Just like this, Lu Xiaoyi had already closed in on him. His long sword didn't have any fancy moves, and it was just a simple sudden stab. In reality, the sudden stab started from 60 meters away. With a kick, a step, and a raise of his hand, the long sword had already directly penetrated through King Chu Jiang's gorgeous clothes. The sword chi of the mortal world burst forth. This kind of attack was useless against a pure living soul, but it was very fatal to King Chu Jiang, who had already comprehended a trace of Tao insight. Because he was no longer a pure living soul. He had always been good at scheming and had an extremely deep understanding of the situation and people's hearts. A perfect assassination in an environment he was familiar with, but the curtains fell in the opponent's completely unreasonable sudden attack. King Chu Jiang had some understanding. Those who were fanning themselves shouldn't face the villain face to face. This was using a weak point to attack the enemy's strong point, and this was the cause of his death. For a moment, he was a little confused. Were his breakthroughs these past few years a gain or a loss? After comprehending a trace of the Tao of the netherworld, he finally broke away from the category of living souls, but instead, he lost his life here. Was the heavens joking with him? Gaining the Tao, losing his life. If he could start all over again, what would he choose? When King Chu Jiang was on the verge of death, all the living souls in the frost hell were no longer restless. They hid far away in fear as they looked at this existence who dared to kill King Yanluo. They didn't dare to resist, but they also couldn't stay far away. It was just like what they had been experiencing ever since they entered the netherworld. He was thinking, if this human wanted to know something, he might be able to keep his life by selling the information, even if he had to start from the living souls again. He had also once thought, if he had to start all over again, would he have the courage to do so? He thought he wouldn't. When he imagined those living souls trembling under his black chains, he didn't dare to imagine how he would persevere if he returned to this kind of state. He might as well just end it all. But now, when he was truly facing life and death, he discovered that his desire to live was exceptionally strong. It was even stronger than 100,000 years ago. Immortality was truly a poison. When you got used to all of this, you wouldn't be able to part with it anymore. But this human cultivator didn't ask anything. He only swallowed and spat out sword chi on his sword, exterminating that trace of Tao intent within his soul. King Chujiang opened his mouth with difficulty. Actually, I can tell you a few things. The human was indifferent. King Chujiang was a little anxious. He didn't have much time left. You might not believe me if I tell you, but we also want to establish a new order in the netherworld. It's completely different from before. Ever since we comprehended a trace of Tao intent, we understood a lot of things. We tolerated and even indulged you guys to kill us because the biggest obstacle to change came from these low-level ghost servants. Lu Xiaoyi looked at him playfully. He raised 3 fingers, indicating that he still had 3 breaths of time. King Chujiang suddenly opened his eyes wide. He was unable to understand this person. Didn't the reason he came to the netherworld was to find out some secrets? Now that the secret was right before his eyes, he was actually indifferent. Someone is instigating it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have improved so quickly. But I won't tell you who it is, unless you remove this damnable sword. I'm King Chujiang. I won't satisfy your curiosity under humiliation. The tip of the sword trembled. King Chujiang opened his eyes wide. He had finished the last journey of his 10+ years of life. In the end, he still wanted to gamble, but he lost. Chapter 2391. When he was completely dead, Lu Xiaoyi opened his mouth. I don't care about your secrets. I only care about my intentions. I'm not here to listen to stories. I'm here to do something. Regardless of whether you're willing or not, there's only one outcome if you stop me. Your idea might be good, but the process isn't good. It's too cruel and bloody. How can you prove that your current understanding can change your way of doing things? In the end, it's just one sentence. I don't like this kind of netherworld. Lu Xiaoyi turned around, looked at the thousands of living souls in the ice-cold netherworld, and said indifferently, "Do we know each other?" A living soul floated out with a twisted face. "Splendid heaven and earth. You killed the horse bandit's 5th boss when you fell. I worked like a horse here and finally became a ghost officer. But in the end, I was beaten back to my original form by you." Lu Xiaoyi stared blankly. "So that's how it is. Then, you stabbed me once. Is the grudge between us settled?" That living soul stared blankly for a long time. If us living souls can have a good reincarnation method in the future, the time in the netherworld, then it'll be settled. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. "All right, I'll try my best." Splendid heaven and earth's 5th boss was an unlucky fellow who was crushed to death by him when he fell. It was also because of this kind of karma that he stood out among the thousands of living souls to plot against him. Lu Xiaoyi judged that the living souls here didn't have the guts to truly make a move against him. His judgment was correct, but his luck wasn't good. He couldn't be bothered to investigate the exact process of the plot, as there were too many aspects. King Chujiang, the child, the 5th boss, and actually also the thousands of living souls here. This was a complicated process, and King Chujiang was very impressive. He was able to mix together so many coincidences, and even a veteran like him fell for it. Actually, when the living souls surged up like a tide, this was already the predestined result. He was only a powerful mortal now, but not a powerful cultivator. He was destined to be unable to avoid the things that mortals were bound to encounter. There was nothing to complain about. Even though his breadth of mind wasn't big, he wouldn't vent his anger on the infant and the 5th boss. One was a child who couldn't control himself, and the other was a blood feud. Both of them had their reasons. What King Chujiang said was meaningless because he'd never believed in speaking the truth before death since he'd cultivated for 3,000 years. When a person is about to die, their words are kind. This is wrong. In fact, the only thing a person will do before death is to extend their life, even if it's for 1 day or 2 hours. For this reason, they were willing to tell a big lie. Therefore, he never listened to the heartfelt words of others before they died. It was very likely that they were digging a hole for you before they died, especially such a cunning old soul that had lived for more than 100,000 years. His thoughts had nothing to do with knowing the secrets of the King Yenluo of Hell. In the eyes of the living souls, these Yama kings were high and mighty. But in his eyes, even if they had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, they were still the souls of mortals. Their way of thinking was a joke to him. The most troublesome thing was the wound on his back. It was not light at all. The chi of the netherworld kept drilling into his body, and the wound was bleeding nonstop. Even if he sealed his acupuncture points, it would not stop the bleeding. He had to speed up. Scooping up his hand, he grasped the small seal that King Chu Zhang's soul dropped after his death. That was the King Chu Zhang seal. If he wanted to completely control the underworld, he might need to gather 10 of them. With the small seal in his hand, the frost hell disappeared. Those living souls that had escaped from the disaster dispersed in a hubbub. No one came to thank him. They only treated it as a dogfight between the higher-ups. Exiting the frost array, the blood-colored sky reappeared in front of his eyes. The underworld's great formation was still there, and there were 7 seals hanging on it. It was a little embarrassing. How could a hired thug like him not be as fast as Daoistsen? He had only dealt with 1, but Daoistsen had already dealt with 2. Without any hesitation, he charged towards the underworld's great formation again. He did not care which one he entered. He had no choice anyway. King Wuguan, blood pool hell. The red here was no longer a color, but a blood that was filled with a sticky feeling. Thousands upon thousands of living souls fell into the blood pool. Under the strong, corrosive blood, they were slowly decomposed into blood corpses, blood clots, blood fragments, and blood droplets. This process was obviously very painful. The mournful howls did not stop for even a moment, continuous and deafening. During the decomposing process, some of the blood clots began to sink to the bottom and were thrown out from the bottom of the blood pool. Then they slowly turned into living souls. The process was as slow as they were being dissolved, and the pain was as deep. The only difference was that one was the pain of being torn apart and decomposed, and the other was the pain of being split and expanded. Compared to the frost hell's quick death and quick rebirth, the painful process here was even worse. King Wuguan was hidden in the depths of the blood pool, controlling everything in the underworld. When he smelled the trace of blood from the wound on the human's back, he smiled in satisfaction. Soul blood was completely different from the blood of a living person, so he was able to sense it at the first possible moment. That idiot, King Chu Jiang, had lost his life in the hands of this person, yet he'd finally done something meaningful before dying. When a living person entered the blood pool with injuries, not only would they have to endure the unforgettable pain of 10,000 ants crawling on their blood, the Een Soul's blood would also corrode the blood of a living person especially intensely. No one could endure this kind of pain. In his hundreds of thousands of years of memories of controlling the blood pool hell, he had never seen anyone who could endure it. Willpower had a limit. Sometimes, pain was even harder to endure than death. Very few people could understand this principle, because there was only one of the 18 layers of hell. Cultivators might be able to do it, but in the underworld, there were no cultivators. King Wuguan stared at the human outside, wondering what method he would use to attack him. In any case, he would not leave the blood pool, not even if he was beaten to death. That idiot King Chu Jiang thought that his martial strength was outstanding. Not only did he snatch the first round, he even competed with this person in courage. And the result was among the 2 humans who came to the underworld to cause trouble. They valued the guy who pretended to be an immortal more than the follower who pretended to be an immortal. It was said that the human cultivators in the Yang realm paid the most attention to status and seniority, and status and seniority represented strength. So, the performance of the 2 people when they first entered the array also proved this point. The human who pretended to be an immortal quickly passed through 2 rounds, but the follower only passed through 1 round and was even seriously injured in the end. The difference between them was self-evident. It was also because of this judgment that the underworld Great Array's main core function was used in the direction of the fake immortal. Right now it was steadily expanding. Although 3 of the 10 Yama Kings had already been defeated, They were confident that they could obtain the final victory in the following battle. Fighting with one drum, weakening with the second, and exhausting with the third, who didn't have a few tricks up their sleeves. Under King Wuwan's gaze, the moment the human entered the blood pool hell, he did not hesitate or observe. Like a rash youth, he plunged headfirst into the blood pool. Without hesitation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.